Homelessness Symposium. We are so excited all of you are here. My name is Demetrius Cheney Perkins. Many of you I have not met in person, but you have probably received emails or seen my name on an email. So if you know we haven't seen each other, please introduce yourself. Please come up to me at any point during the day. I would love to meet who I've been communicating with via email. Very excited about that. Do we have any elected officials in the room? If you could raise your hand. Are any of you here? All right, I know there was a really long council meeting last night that probably ended close to the sun coming up. So they may be a little bit delayed today. But nevertheless, we are very, very excited for their support. There is also if you are a part of our Constant Contact, you may have already seen the virtual link to join. So if you know anyone who could not be here, that virtual link is already out there on Metro's YouTube channel. So we hope you share that information as well. Is our Homelessness Planning Council chair in the room? Kenita Patterson in the back, if everybody could just give her a hand. First time in Metro's history, we've had an HPC with lived experience, and we are grateful that you're here. A few housekeeping rules, if you don't know already. If you go right out these doors, turn to the right, down on the left are restrooms. And we want to make sure that, how many of you are already on the Hoover app? Who's downloaded it? Yay. That is many of you in the room. So thank you for that. On that Hoover app, you may have noticed a code of conduct. What we want to do is make sure everyone is respected in the room, and we've worked really hard to create that environment. So we ask you to just follow the good neighbor rule. Treat everyone as you would want to be treated. And as long as everyone is respectful in the room, I feel like this is going to go really great. As a public information officer, what I hope will happen is that everyone leaves more informed. What you do with the information, all of us, I don't believe you would be in this room if you didn't have a call to service. And it is a privilege to serve here. It's a privilege to serve you. It's a privilege to serve the community. It's just a privilege to serve, and I know you're here for the same thing. And we are going to get right to our first speakers. So, April Calvin, no one is a stranger to our director of the Office of Homeless Services. When I first got to the office, I used to hear her say all the time, "Don't grow weary in doing the most good." And she would throw her hand up and say that. And I thought, I wonder what that looks like in practice. Boy, let me tell you, she is the boots on the ground lady. For many of you, you may have already seen on the news, this was a big week. It was a big week and a big win for people living outside. So we are very fortunate for many of you in this room who helped to house 107 people. That is unprecedented. Yes, give yourselves a hand. It is not us, OHS, it is us. It is everyone in this room. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Without further ado, I am going to turn it over to April Calvin.
Good morning, everyone. Normally I would come in with some mom joke and be like, "Good morning, New York." We're in Nashville. I know, I get it. All right, so as the first director, as the first African-American female director of the Office, thank you. of the Office of Homeless Services. I thank you. I thank you all that give me calls late mornings, early mornings, late nights. I thank you all that pray and support our team. I thank you all that dismiss the false narratives, fake news, and misleading facts. I thank you all for being here today in spite of it being 90 degrees and beautiful outside, because I have summer flight. Some have spring fling. I have summer flight, so I'm working through that. I also would like to say thank you to my fabulous, dynamic team. The office, yay! Look at this room. This is beautiful. I mean, this was pulled off in the midst of cold weather shelter, addressing encampments, continuing with other ongoing work, worrying about federal changes, all of the things that we all have going on throughout the year. This was pulled off. I am honored. I am honored. Such a lovely team. Who do we have in the room? And I'll start with our board chair. She keeps moving about. She was back there. Kanitha Patterson is over here to the left. She is the chair of our Homeless Planning Council. Do we have any other Homeless Planning Council members in the room? I see our vice chair, Rico X. Thank you all for being here. Do we have any of our Consumer Advisory Board members here? That's CAB, people with a lived experience that's helping to lead the work. I know majority of our elected officials are getting some rest right now. That meeting went long last night, so we do have a table for them if they're able to make it in. Several registered, but maybe did not. We're not aware of how long it was going to go last night. Raise your hand if you are an official member of our Continuum of Care. Raise your hand if you are chair of a COC subcommittee. I love it. I love it. I love it. This work cannot be done without each and every one of you all. I greatly appreciate you all. Are there any armed service members here today? No. Governmental employees, I got to always give us a good shout out. Yeah. And CEOs and executive directors of nonprofits, service providers, faith-based organizations, right? Just trying to get a feel for the room here today. Media, I'm sure Demetrius has a table for you all or has worked out some kinks, right? All righty, so just wanted to get a feel for the room. I am honored to lead alongside of such a dynamic team and dynamic group of people here. So thank you for coming out. This will be the first of many. I feel as though getting our information out and getting the data out in front of you all is vitally important. I'm also honored to lead alongside of such a courageous mayor, and local council members. We have one that just arrived. Welcome. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here. As a leader, I'm a firm believer that we have not because we ask not. So sometimes we have to dispel the scarcity mindset. As a community, it takes each and every one of us to dispel the scarcity mindset and eliminating self from this work. We will successfully conquer homelessness in that order. As local government, OHS is committed to finding funding and lobbying our council members. We are committed to finding funding to address this work as it relates to homelessness. We are committed to eliminating status quo and reducing long stayers in shelters and reducing the stress that comes along with living unsheltered. We're also committed to working diligently, even while having to drown out some of the news and fake news. I am thankful as a leader that I get to hold that tension. I am thankful as a leader that I get to hold the tension of fiery, passionate service providers that are in this room. I am thankful as a leader that I get to hold the attention of our Consumer Advisory Board and all of their efforts. I'm thankful that I get to hold the attention of the energetic elected officials. As a leader, I am thankful that I get to hold the attention of all of the folks from whom we are centered, which is vitally important. I had the honor and the privilege of serving on national stages with some of you all, especially our board chair in the past. And I'm thankful that we have national leaders that chose to come here today to hear about the great work that's going on, inform us of best practices, and help us move the trajectory for our unhoused individuals. I was blessed to be a part of an app creation 5 years ago. We're still debating the intellectual properties. But this app would be a driving force and a game changer for service provision for our unhoused individuals, our unhoused Nashville neighbors. What I'm most proud of is the opportunity to design and cultivate the professional development of innovative teams. Our teams are working hard. My team, the community, other metro departments. This work is not done in a silo. We have 17 committees, over 50 COC official members, 25 HPC members, and looking to move into 2 smaller work groups that will address the medically fragile and those that are aging, along with systems analysis of how we do this work, how we show up to do this work, and how we can do it more efficiently and effectively. Hopefully, between looking at some of our data, understanding our funding, and hearing all of the great successes and best practices and urgent news that we're going to receive from our national leaders, hopefully you get out of today what you came for. If not, we will have a survey. Kayla Ritchie will have a survey where we can gather more information to make sure we do it a little bit better. As a department, we've achieved some great milestones. As a department, we have achieved some great milestones. I just want to share. In the booklet you have in front of you, I won't read all of those things because that's a lot of information there. But on that first page, I do want to say I'm honored to be the asset managers of the award-winning Strobel House. It's a building that is like riverfront properties, downtown condos. You guys probably heard me say it 1,000 times because that is a building I am so proud of. I had the privilege, our team had the privilege and the honor of operating cold weather shelter this year. You might have heard us grumble a little bit. It was long days, an unprecedented amount of days, 46 days or 46 nights of sheltering. What I'm most thankful for is the number of deaths that's decreased within the last year. We were on a trajectory 3 years ago of hitting high numbers. We were on a trajectory of hitting high numbers of people experiencing or dying while experiencing homelessness. In the last year, we have turned that curve, 45% decrease. And that work was done by everyone here. Sorry, when I'm responsible for my own slides, I'm a little bit behind. But that work was done by everyone here. That work was done by each and every one here. A 45% decrease in the number of people experiencing or dying while experiencing homelessness here in Nashville. That's awesome. Another thing that we are proud of as a community, what I did not ask, do we have any landlords, property owners, realtors in the room? Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here. What ends homelessness is housing. What ends homelessness is housing. That's why we will continue to fight for housing, continue to fight for funding and resources, because that's what we need to address the housing crisis that we're in. So thank you for being here. If you are a property owner or a landlord or realtor, we have increased the number of properties that provide services to the Low Barrier Housing Collective from 147 to 333 properties, which is awesome. Now yay, thank you. Thank you. Now the number of vacant units they hold, right? We won't talk about that because I do know some people are like, well, that's not a true number. It's a true number. It's an average of 700 vacant units with the Low Barrier Housing Collective here in Nashville, which is why our budget request is so vitally important, because our unhoused individuals cannot attain those units without some ongoing subsidy. And so in our budget request, you'll hear about it in a little bit, where that's a huge ask for us as a department. Ongoing rental assistance, non-traditional rapid rehousing, non-traditional, when I say non-traditional, meaning not with the federal demands and requirements, but something locally that we can be in charge of, which is exciting. Another thing that as a community, OHS is the new collaborative applicant, and that just recently started, right, this year. But we were on a trajectory 4 years ago to remain steady at $3 to $5 million. $3 to $5 million is all we receive for a community our size. I think with some of the strategic planning, a lot of the great work that you all have done, the development of a new Office of Homeless Services, we are the collaborative applicant. We have been able to move that trajectory, and we've had a 32% increase. We went from averaging 3 to 5. We went from averaging 3 to 5 million, and we hit 11.8 million this year. And that's unheard of for a community to grow that fast. So I'm getting these fingers telling me to wrap it up. So I'm going to move a little faster, but I like to live in this data because we see it and hear it a lot, written differently than the way we know it to be. So I would like to share that. I think that, let's see, here we are. This is my last slide. I think Demetrius talked a little bit about Anthony's Drive. Anthony's Drive closed after 60 days. 107 individuals moved into whether temporary, shared, permanent. One had a VASH voucher, moved into housing. And let me tell you, we heard stories of, this is the first time I feel as though I was set up for success. This is the first time that I feel as though I was set up for success properly as they moved into permanent housing. We're going to move on to, I believe, Megan Vickers. Megan Vickers is going to share a little bit more about our data, and then we'll tag team a little bit if needed.
Good morning, everyone. As April said, my name is Megan, and I'm going to kick us off by talking about everyone's favorite thing, which is HUD reports and data. So this is our system performance measures is what we're going to look at. Some important level setting we should do before we start looking at the data is just to be reminded that this reflects data over a very certain time period. For this data we're going to look at, that's going to be October 1st of 2023 to September 30th of 2024. This is also only data collected from our Continuum of Care funded projects, or COC projects is what we're going to look at specifically. And again, a shout out to HMIS. This is all data collected from your local HMIS system. Another important note for this one is these system performance measures can sometimes account for up to 40% of our score on the notice of funding. So that's why if you are an HMIS participating agency, you have heard from Chantel or Hannah or myself asking lots of questions to make sure we're reporting this data correctly. We're going to jump right into Measure 1. Measure 1 is looking at the length of time homeless for people in our system. You'll notice those arrows on the left-hand side. That's going to note if this is an increase or a decrease from last year's SPM data. So we see for folks who were staying in emergency shelter or safe haven beds, we have about 59 days of homelessness. Folks who are in emergency shelters, safe havens, or transitional housing is 96. And then for those in emergency shelter, safe haven, transitional, and permanent housing, we have 1,038 days of homelessness. Uh-oh. Measure 2, you all do have this data in front of you. It's worth noting it is in your packet. For Measure 2, you have this data broken down by project type if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty of this. Here we are looking at the returns to homelessness over the last 2 years for this system performance measure. HUD does ask us to break this out by number of months. So you'll see that yellow is those who returned in less than 6 months. Blue reflects those who returned in 6 to 12 months, and that purple color is those who returned between 13 to 24 months. Measure 3, this is our number of homelessness persons, and a lot of you are going to be familiar with the PIT count. That's what we often think of when we think of how do we know how many people are experiencing homelessness in our city, is our PIT count. That's going to be that point in time count. But it's also worth noting, your HMIS team is always going to remind you that this is just a snapshot of one night in our city. We also see on the right-hand side in that yellow column, you've got your annual sheltered count. So that's going to look at people over the course of a year who stayed in our shelters here in our city. Measure 4, this is always an exciting one for us to see this number grow. This is those who gained income while we were serving them in those COC-funded projects. You'll see that 44% of people who stayed in our COC-funded projects during that time period grew their income, and 22% of people who were leavers, meaning they left the project during this reporting period, also grew their income while we worked with them. Measure 5 is the number of people who experienced homelessness for the first time. So you'll see that big blue number, 2,651. This number can be kind of misleading because in order to be considered experiencing homelessness for the first time, you just need to have not interacted with our HMIS system in the last 2 years. So if maybe you were unhoused in 2020 and then you came back in 2024, that would count you as first-time homelessness, even though if we sat down and talked, that you may be telling me a different narrative. We did skip Measure 6. Don't think this was a flub on our part. Measure 6 is a measure that HUD only calls for high-performing cities, of which we have none currently in our country. So we skip right over to Measure 7. This is going to be our successful placements in permanent housing. These, again, are always exciting for us to look at how many folks are leaving program types and exiting directly into permanent housing. You'll see that top number is going to reflect those who started out in a street outreach project and then exited directly into a permanent housing destination. That makes up about a third of our street outreach exits. The next number is going to look at folks who left emergency shelters, safe havens, transitional housings, and rapid rehousing programs to permanent housing, which is about 45%. And then the last number we're going to look at is the people who retained that permanent housing, which is about 96%. So awesome, exciting data. If you ever have any questions about these, you can always reach out to our HMIS team at the HMIS Help Desk.
So you may remember the mayor saying, we are not afraid of this data. We are not afraid of this data. This data is not to be weaponized, not to be used against anyone. We, for the last 3 years, have been working to get to baseline data. Multiple years, many years prior to 3 years, we did not have great data collection. Prior to 3 years, we did not have encampments and unsheltered entered into our system. Prior to 3 years, we did not have the number, I think we have at 47 agencies that are utilizing our HMIS system. And then also, prior to 3 years ago, we did not have a data bridge for our largest, give her a clap. Joy and Glenn, welcome our Nashville Rescue Mission team, right? We did not have data imported from them. They were gracious and allowing us to help build a bridge to be able to get that data synced into our system. Also, I know everyone likes to live on the PIT count, right? And so PIT is a one-time snapshot. For me, I do want to highlight that with some of the federal changes, with the vendor that we're using, their tool was not allowing us to upload the data, and there's been some back and forth on getting this data imported. What is important to note is last year, we saw a slight decrease, while nationally, they saw an 18% increase. Also, what is to note is from the data that we're reviewing until we get it certified by HUD, we're kind of trending in the same direction. I think with the housing pressures that we have here, I think with wages not keeping up with the economic demand for me, and also knowing that for every one person that enters into for every one person that's housed, our data shows that 3 people are entering into homelessness. So having a pit count that's trending around the same and not drastically increasing, I believe is a win. I do want to move on to offer hope because 1, the data is hopeful for me, but 2, the funding is even more hopeful. I would like to introduce the Assistant Director, Joseph Marsh. I just call him Marsh. I'm sorry. Joseph Marsh. He's going to go over our investments. I'm going to mess you up.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. Again, my name is Joseph Marsh, and it's a privilege to stand before you today, representing the Nashville Office of Homeless Services, and to share an overview of what truly is a once-in-a-generation opportunity, a $50 million investment towards ending homelessness in Nashville. This is more than just a large number. It represents a chance to reset systems, create pathways to permanent housing, and address the gaps that have long left too many of our neighbors unhoused. This investment, largely made possible by the federal COVID relief funds, reflects a deep recognition that homelessness is solvable, but only with bold vision, cross-sector collaboration, and intentional use of resources. With $50 million dedicated to addressing homelessness in Nashville, we're not just funding programs, we're restoring dignity and building futures. In this city, to have not will never mean to be without hope. All right, going to do a little bit of overview. Today, I want to share the framework behind our approach to ending homelessness. In Nashville, an approach rooted in both compassion and strategy. At the heart of this work is gap financing. Let's start with the $25 million allocated to gap financing administered through MDHA and Metro's planning department. These dollars are helping unlock affordable and supportive housing developments that were otherwise stalled or underfunded. By stepping in with these funds, we're able to bridge the final mile, plugging financial holes so projects can move from paper to groundbreaking. We've seen the direct impact. Units that would have taken years or never materialized at all are now underway and moving towards completion. These investments are bringing long-term solutions to life. Next, we committed $9 million. Got some funky formatting up there, but I'm gonna talk us through it. Next, we committed $9 million to interim gap housing, solutions that provide immediate shelter and stability while individuals transition to permanent housing. These include enhanced shelter options, surge housing efforts to rapidly expand available units, and flexible options tailored for those facing unique barriers. Interim housing plays a vital role. It reduces the trauma associated with street homelessness, keeps people connected to supportive services, and most importantly, saves lives as we scale up long-term solutions. We also committed another $9 million to housing support services because we know that housing alone isn't enough. It's the wraparound care, the people-focused services that make the difference between short-term shelter and lasting stability. This funding goes towards case management, mental and behavioral health, substance use support, workforce development, and more. These are the tools that help people not just stay housed, but heal, grow, and rebuild. Without them, housing can falter. But when we invest in people alongside housing, when we walk with them every step of the way, we see better outcomes, stronger communities, and real movement toward solving homelessness at its roots. Because this isn't about putting a roof over someone's head. It's about making sure they have what they need to stay under it. We also set aside $7 million for low barrier grants and capacity building because real solutions require flexibility and trust in the people that are doing the work on the ground. These These funds go to the frontline organizations, many of you here today, that need responsive, adaptive resources to meet people exactly where they are. The means supporting mobile outreach, harm reduction services, and models that don't require sobriety, paperwork, or ID make a precondition for help. And just as we're asking service providers to lower barriers, we're also supporting landlords who do the same. Those willing to open their doors to tenants who face tough challenges, these funds help cover added risk and provide stability so landlords can be a part of the solution. This is about building capacity, not just programs, but in people, partnership, places, so we can respond to the needs at the scale and speed this crisis demands. As of today, all the funds have been allocated, but the spending is not yet complete. With 1 year remaining to invest our ARPA funds, we have momentum on our side. Already, 1,899 unique individuals have been served, proof that progress is not just possible, it's happening right now. We're actively working on a thoughtful strategic spend down plans because while the dollars are committed, getting them out the door in a timely and effective way is the next critical step. And we're on the clock. The deadline is July 2026. That may sound like a long runway, but when it comes to planning, contracting, and implementing real solution, it's closer than it seems. We have to move with urgency. These are one-time dollars, and every unspent dollar is a missed chance to make a difference in someone's life. That's why we're working hand-in-hand with community partners, housing developers, service providers, and departments to make sure every single dollar goes to its highest and best use. We're identifying the gaps, evaluating what's working, and investing in scale. And we're doing that with transparency and accountability, front and center. Because these funds are more than just a budget line, they're a lifeline, and we can't afford to leave impact on the table. Looking toward the future, last year we put forward a significant budget request, and with the support of ARPA funding, that vision became a reality. This year, we made another strong ask because of courageous leadership that believes in lasting change and continues to invest in solutions that work. Looking ahead, our budget request this year increased support for operational costs of permanent supportive housing. Capital funding gets us the buildings, but ongoing operations such as staff, maintenance, and supportive services are what keep them functional and humane. We need to ensure those doors just don't open, but stay open. We also propose funding for non-traditional rapid rehousing models, flexible, creative options to house people faster. This is especially critical as we've seen tremendous success in fully utilizing our federal housing vouchers, thanks to the incredible collaboration to many in this room. Beyond city funding, we continue to assist partner organizations in pursuing competitive grant opportunities from federal and state grants, including through the continuum of care and our departmental pipeline. But we must remain nimble. The federal funding landscape is changing, and legislation at the national level could affect what's available. We need to diversify our resources and stay proactive. I want to close by saying this: the work ahead requires innovation. It requires creativity, and it requires listening, especially to the expert in this room. This symposium is a space for that. The ideas shared by presenters and the hallway conversation with your peers, that's where the future is shaped. Whether it's pallet shelters, housing cooperatives, social enterprise partnerships, or new models for wraparound care, we must stay bold. The solutions are not one size fits all, but we can combine funding, knowledge, and community wisdom. We can build a system that works. Thank you for your time, your heart, and your partnership. Whether you work in outreach, housing development, public policy, or advocacy, you're part of this shared mission. Let's use these one-time funds to leave a legacy we can all be proud of. Thank you.
So guys, if you don't know me, I'm a stickler for time. If you have questions, which I'm pretty sure you do, about all this information you heard, you can write those questions down on the note cards. Raquel, raise your hand. Allison, where is she? Okay. Raquel is going to come around to pick those up. I assure you I will get answers to those questions. So if you would include on that note card your email address, or my email address is demetris.cheney2@nashville.gov. Many of you probably know that. We want to just keep it moving, and I promise you I will get your questions answered. So we're going to pivot to a man who is no stranger to Nashville. Dr. Sam Semberis is a clinical community psychologist who developed the Housing First program based on the belief that housing is a basic human right. Housing First is successfully implemented in cities across the United States as well as internationally. Dr. Sam Semberis is the CEO of Pathways Housing First Institute and a clinical associate professor at UCLA Department of Psychiatry. He has published numerous articles and 2 books on homelessness and mental illness, and received recognition for his work from the National Alliance to End Homelessness, American Psychiatric and American Psychological Associations, the Government of Canada as well, and in 2024 was recognized by Time magazine as one of the 100 most influential people. Without delay, Dr. Sam Semberis.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that introduction. Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to be in Nashville again. All right. Maybe not. Thanks, Logan. Okay. Well, thank you very much for inviting me back. This is my second time this year. I was here in April, and you already have a very good summary of everything that's going on in Nashville, and it's breathtaking in terms of its scope and range and all of the activities around the community. And yet there's a lot to be done, and I don't want to start talking about some suggestions from the observations I've made over the last couple of trips without first acknowledging that we're living in a very, very difficult time in this country. And, you know, the politics and the atmosphere of our day-to-day news feeds is overwhelming and difficult to digest. And I really couldn't find words to kind of summarize it in terms of how it affects our lives in this sector. It affects our lives in all kinds of sectors. But, you know, to talk about how it's affecting our work. But I found this poem that I wanted to read to you that strangely captures this moment. And you'll have to bear with me. It's a few verses. The poem is called Waiting for the Barbarians, and it's by Konstantin Cavafy. Has anyone heard of it? No English lit majors. What are we waiting for, assembled in the forum? The barbarians are coming today. Why isn't anything going on in the Senate? Why are the senators sitting there without legislating? Because the barbarians are coming today. What's the point of senators making laws now? Once the barbarians are here, they'll do the legislating. Why did our governor get up so early? And why is he sitting enthroned at the main gate of the Capitol in state wearing the crown? Because the barbarians are coming today, and the governor is waiting to receive their leader. He's even got a scroll to give him, loaded with titles, with imposing names. We have two consuls and praetors come out today wearing their embroidered, their scarlet togas. Why have they put on bracelets with so many amethysts, rings sparkling with magnificent emeralds? Why are they carrying elegant canes beautifully worked in silver and gold? Because the barbarians are coming today, and these things, and things like this, dazzle the barbarians. Why don't our distinguished orators turn up as usual to make their speeches, say what they have to say? Because the barbarians are coming today, and they're bored by rhetoric and public speaking. Why this sudden bewilderment, this confusion? How serious people's faces have become? Why are the streets and squares emptying so rapidly, everyone going home lost in thought? Because night has fallen and the barbarians haven't come. And some of our men just in from the border say, there are no barbarians any longer. What is going to happen to us without barbarians? Those people were a kind of solution. Cavafy wrote this poem in 1898, 127 years ago. Yet the political situation he describes rings true for our politics today, as it does for ancient Rome, which is referred to in the poem. Authoritarian regimes are not new. We know that they succeed by dividing people and pitting one group against another, and they create imagined enemies by playing on fears and stereotypes. Creating an atmosphere of fear perpetuates an illusion of imminent threat, and the regime declares a state of emergency that results in issuing more executive orders that limit personal freedoms. The result is almost a daily assault on the Constitution, democracy, human rights, universities, law firms, civil society, judges, students, minorities, and the poor, and everyone else who disagrees. We may feel overwhelmed and helpless. That is part of the authoritarian regime strategy. But these assaults create both a sense of dread and a sense of urgency. Cavafy's poem ends with an unexpected reversal of fortune where the barbarians do not actually arrive. This twist in the narrative poses a challenge. What is the point of remaining idle, frozen in fear, because the barbarians may not arrive? Perhaps he's saying, let's not lose time out of fear. These times of social and civil structures at risk summon in us a call to action. And that's how I understand the poem. The poem is a call to action. And so the question is, what can we do today? What can we do, given the unknown federal outcomes of budget cuts and everything else? What can we do to preserve what we're doing and continue to move forward? Is this crisis possibly an opportunity? Today, in this symposium, we are assembled to share ideas about how best to address homelessness in Nashville. We're committed to taking action as a community. That is already a bold step. Leading up to this conference, I had the opportunity to meet with several providers, met with Metro staff, advocates, people with lived experience. And I assure you that the people here, as you already know, and amongst yourselves, are not frozen in fear on the issue of homelessness. There's a great deal of commitment and passion for solving homelessness. The question is, what can we do better? We've already seen things are better than they were, but can we go from good to better above that. And my comments and suggestions really are an effort to take some experiences from other cities and that have realized great success on this issue and rewrite or make those suggestions for Nashville. I have a four-step suggestion plan. Some of this is already implemented. First is prioritization. I don't think we have disagreement as a community on prioritization. The visibly homeless represent only about 20% of the total population experiencing homelessness. However, in the public's mind, they represent all homelessness. In fact, homelessness is much broader. It actually includes many people who are staying with friends, living in their cars, families living in shelters, and others in out-of-sight locations. There are many more people who are homeless that we don't see or count, but who are on the edge of falling into homelessness. In a recent book by Brian Gladstone called "There Is No Place for Us," he reports that there isn't a single state, metropolitan area, or county in the United States where a full-time worker earning the minimum wage can afford a two-bedroom apartment. I was doing the data for Nashville, and in this rapidly prospering metropolis, someone earning the minimum federal wage of $7.25 an hour to rent a studio apartment, which has an average range of $1,579 a month, would have to work 52 hours a week just to pay the rent. Currently, 11.4 million low-income households are classified as severely cost-burdened, meaning that they have to spend an average of 78% of their earnings towards their rent. There are also enormous racial disparities in homelessness in every single state. Goldstone actually followed several families in Atlanta that were living in their cars when he wrote this book. And he observes that the delivery drivers, daycare workers, supermarket cashiers, and home health aides who help sustain cities are being pushed out of them. Since 1985, rent prices nationwide have exceeded income gains by 325%. These issues must be addressed if we're going to end all homelessness. It's overwhelming, so we prioritize, we ration. We prioritize because it's the humane thing to do. It's in some ways a way to take the most vulnerable out of the system. We prioritize the people who are living on the streets of downtown, or we prioritize the people that were living in RVs and in tents in Old Tent City, and others who can barely ambulate and are the most vulnerable. This group comprises only a small fraction of the homeless population. It is one that absorbs the predominance of services while still remaining homeless. Their mental health and physical health deteriorate while homeless. And in addition to medical services, they require disproportionate amounts of police time, fire calls, ambulances, emergency room visits, and other costly acute care services. But we must start with people living near a state of emergency to save lives and resources. And also, because this is a small number, we can achieve success with this group. We can build momentum and then expand our services to the rest of the population. There are things that need tweaking in the coordinated entry system and the way that we prioritize so that we're better able to identify people that meet this high priority group. But I think there is wide consensus in the community that this is the strategy to take. The second strategy is to expand the tent and build consensus. I don't mean people living in homeless tents. We also live in tents, you know, in our own ways of siloed organizations and governments. The idea of expanding the tent and building consensus is really an invitation to adopt a community-wide approach to a housing-first a community-wide housing-first approach, let's put it that way. We need to build consensus and agreement that would be the way to go. What does a community-wide housing-first approach means? It means that homelessness cannot be the sole responsibility of the City Office of Homeless Services and the city's providers. While the mayor's office is charged with leading the community-wide initiative, the stakeholders group must expand to include active participation from the sectors affected by this issue. Active participation, not only by participating in meetings, but also contributing to the solution. This includes police, district attorneys, courts, hospital emergency room, business and faith community, people with lived experience, philanthropy, and others. In a citywide approach, the principles of Housing First are not only utilized by the service providers, but they're adopted by the other stakeholders. Service providers of all stakeholders must share the common vision of moving the most vulnerable towards permanent housing as quickly as possible. In such a model, long-term stayers, frequent users of emergency departments, or people who are homeless and going in and out of jail are referred to a Housing First program. For the police, adopting a Housing First approach means not arresting people or issuing summonses for being homeless, but instead issuing referrals or providing transportation to a homeless intake center. It means that the business owner is not calling the police about a person staying at the entrance of their store, but instead calling a responsive outreach team that will show up quickly to address the issue. It means that the faith community shelters do not have lengthy lists of prerequisites and curfews that must be met for admission, but instead operate their shelters more flexibly with more flexible schedules and make referrals to outreach rather than turn away or evict ineligible guests. A citywide approach means everyone is using the same compass and can identify true north: permanent supportive housing, the place where homelessness ends. The third suggestion is to use measurable goals to assess process. We've already seen some of the data being collected, and I think this is key in terms of being able to track what we're doing and progress towards the goal. Ending chronic homelessness is a multi-year plan. It requires a timeline, requires measurable goals, record keeping, transparent reporting of outcomes in a system that is shared by all parties. Because this is a multi-year project, measuring progress along the way ensures that the program is moving in the right direction, and the data may afford the program the availability to troubleshoot problems as they occur in real time. Reliable data and transparent record-keeping systems create accountability and build trust among the stakeholders, and also serve as milestones to celebrate gains along the way. Should we call this a citywide housing first approach? You know, I want to take a moment to address the regime's attack on housing first as homeless policy and the anti-housing first propaganda that's being published by the Cicero Group and the Manhattan Institute and other right-wing think tanks. We learned before this group took office that in Project 25, the homeless policy was going to be housing last. Housing last was actually their term for it. And this is both ignorant and cruel. It calls for a return to predominantly ineffective and punitive approaches of 30 years ago, when people with complex problems were required to achieve sobriety and participate in psychiatric treatment as a precondition for any housing, even shelter. And because they were unable or unwilling to meet these requirements, they remained homeless for years and many died on the streets. It's futile to make rational counter-arguments against the housing last approach, or to point to the mountain of research evidence that supports the effectiveness of housing first compared to treatment first approaches. I'm sure you've noticed that we're not living in an area of rational discourse. We are living in an era of reality TV. The distortion of facts is perhaps the most destructive and dangerous attribute of this administration. We can learn from the regime's own highly effective strategy and repeat the key points of our own message. If housing first policy attacks extend to take hold at HUD, and the term of the use housing first needs to be banned, like they've done with DEI or other initiatives, then I suggest we stop using the term and instead describe what we are doing in simple terms that don't require the label and are in fact more precise. To quote Will Connolly in The Contributor, I got handed a Contributor yesterday. I read it and was a no. Yeah, I give a shout out. It's a great paper, and the article was wonderful. It was like written for this conference, and it was written in 2024. Will said about taking the system change needed in Nashville. In this system, we all know the goal, and we are working together to achieve it. It must be built on a shared understanding of what truly works, a person-centered, data-driven approach that prioritizes rapid access to stable housing. And I would add, with strong support services. That's what we call it. We call it a person-centered, data-driven approach that prioritizes rapid access to housing with supports. And then we can proceed, you know. In order to do this, what I'm describing, we need a lot more resources than we have now. I mean, it's a good plan, but how are we going to get the resources to do it? We need three things. We need a clearly identified point of access or points of access, whether that's a reception center or a citywide number. We need a number where people can call and get a response to a referral about a homeless person. Not that we'll see you Tuesday, but if someone from the business community is calling this morning, someone needs to be there by noon. It needs to be not as a 911, but as a 711. Not like a clinic referral where you get an appointment next week. So the responsiveness of that system is key to building trust in the community that someone is actually listening and responding to the calls. We will not be able to solve every call that comes in, but the point of being responsive and accountable builds the system stronger. We need the team. We need a center to bring people in, a reception center, let's call it, or a resource center, some communities call it. And we need the outreach team to do that, responsiveness. And the last thing we need, and the most difficult, is we need hundreds and hundreds of housing choice vouchers. Now, without vouchers, we're not going anywhere. And right now, you know, the way Nashville looks right now from an economic perspective, the city is becoming so prosperous that you are approaching the kinds of numbers in the real estate market that other major American cities are, and that only results in out-of-control homelessness. Homelessness, you know, is 70% on the east and west coasts, from Seattle to San Diego, New York, Washington, you know, Atlanta, Miami, because the rents are impossibly high, and the cities are prosperous. The product of great prosperity at great speed when neighborhoods are gentrified is that the affordable housing begins to disappear and the numbers go up. Where does homelessness come from? It comes from that dynamic exactly. And Nashville is on the cusp. So, but it's not there yet. There are, as I argued with Mr. Rizzo, that I do believe there are, and I get the data from April, so I know it's good, that there are units that we can rent if the voucher value meets fair market value. That's not a lost cause. And where would we get these vouchers? Well, the Housing Authority is frozen in fear. The Housing Authority has been threatened by the barbarians that their funding's going to be cut. No one's issuing any vouchers there anytime soon. What other cities and other states have done is they have created their own local housing voucher. Washington, D.C., the state of Georgia, North Carolina, places have raised a tax or created a tax set aside to create local housing vouchers. They work just like the federal voucher, probably more flexible, less restrictive, and they are the solution to having enough resources in place to be able to access the housing that we need. I know that Tennessee is a state where there's no state income tax, so there is room to contribute to a tax system to provide social services that would benefit everyone in the community. I think one of the messages we don't do a very good job of communicating in the homelessness sector is that we're talking about people who are homeless and not emphasizing enough that ending homelessness is actually good for everyone in that community. Finally, just a word about prevention, and it was mentioned by April briefly, 3 people show up for every 1 person housed. The data I had was from LA, where I was working, where one of the disgruntled Los Angeles Service Authority directors left, and she reported that they were housing in LA County, 13 million people. They housed 207 people every day, and 217 showed up as new referrals for homeless services. So prevention is not only inexpensive, but hugely effective. A utility bill, a month's rent, a resolution of an argument with the landlord can keep people housed so they don't fall into homelessness, and because the journey out is long, painful, and expensive. So Nashville has a lot of knowledge, committed and passionate people all seeking to achieve the goal of ending homelessness. That means that the most essential ingredients for success are already in place here in Nashville. Thank you.
Thank you. We do have about 15 minutes. Raquel is coming through. Okay. If you have questions for Dr. Simbaris. All right, Dr. Joseph Marsh, if you could get Raquel a microphone. That's one of, okay. Oh, I see one. Get it to Raquel.
All right. I have a microphone, and it looks like we're getting one more question. I'll have Allison go get that. One of the first questions we have is, have you seen any cities that have successfully implemented... I don't know what I'm doing. Okay. That have successfully implemented the rapid response phone line, for example, 711. Why and how were they successful? What can we learn from those cities?
Cities have been successful. In terms of the helpline specifically, I would say that the closer the helpline is to the response agent, rather than like a citywide 211 line, having someone actually answer the phone when the referral comes in about a homeless person is the best way to use that line, and having a team ready there to deploy to respond to the referral. Some of the ways that the lines have been funded, also, I can tell you in one city, in Milwaukee, the Business Improvement District, and this is the importance of having all stakeholders at the table, they wanted a quicker response when they're calling homeless services rather than, let's say, somewhere in a residential area. They wanted accountability, and they ended up funding an outreach line so that when they would call the city to have someone come and work with the person who was in that area, they all had already paid for somebody who was essentially their own staff coming back connected to resources. So it's actually not a complicated thing to do. It's just needs to be managed well. And I would say the key thing is the responsiveness. Just like when landlords call when there's an issue. You can't resolve the landlord issues, but if the landlord hears from you and they know there's someone working with you on this tenancy, that builds a lot of faith in the process.
Thank you. I'm going to tie in two questions that we received. So one question is, what would you say to a provider or agency who says Housing First cannot work in their community? And then we also got a question related to how to engage landlords on very similar issues in terms of housing folks or being willing to take on tenants who have experienced homelessness.
I think the landlord, let me take the landlord question first, because I think we talked about vouchers, which are essential. It's kind of the main ingredient for being able to pay people's rent, that rent subsidy. But there's a lot of nuance in the working with landlords. Landlords need to be assured that their unit will be indemnified if there's damage to the unit. There's also, some cities have offered signing bonuses, an extra month security deposit because they're taking high-risk rental tenants. And of course, the support service piece is best managed when you have someone who is a housing specialist more than a case manager responding to the landlord. Essentially, the landlord relationship needs case management, and you have a caseload of landlords that people respond to, because you're asking people who are in the community without any additional services and operating housing to take people that we typically put in places like the Strobel House, where the staff on site and property management and safety, from that highly supervised unit to an apartment in the community is a huge fall. So just giving a voucher is not enough. You have to also support the landlord with the kinds of services that would make them feel like they're collaborating in this. The first question about if Housing First doesn't work in the community?
Yeah, it was if there are service providers who doesn't believe that it can work.
I think there are communities where there's absolutely no affordable housing. I drove through some yesterday. There's just mansions. So it's like, if you don't have affordable housing in the community, you're not going to be able to do Housing First. I think the only restriction, it's sort of the zoning. You'll only be able to rent where the voucher can find you units. That's the only restriction. There's no other restriction in terms of who or how many.
Thank you. I'm also going to tie in two more questions. So one part is, how would you explain to a skeptic why ending homelessness is good for everyone? And another one is how you would respond to resistance regarding new taxes or increase in taxes to pay for local vouchers.
Yeah. Why is ending homelessness good for everyone? I don't know. I mean, I think if any of you have had the experience of walking down a street in the city, and when you've had, putting our own reactions aside, when you've had a very young child next to you, 6 or 7 or 10 years old, And the reaction, the natural reaction of children in seeing a person who is homeless is compassion, is fear. It's like they turn and say, Dad, why is this person here? Like, what's going on? Because they haven't been socialized yet into looking away, into the looking away. And yet when you ask students in college what was their first memory of seeing a homeless person, they will report that they remember walking with their mom or their dad and being told, don't stare, it's not polite to stare, look away. And so we're socialized into looking away. And that's the reason I think that homelessness continues, because I think if we are not shutting down our own humanity sufficiently to be able to manage walking away, we would be stopped and upset and be doing much more about it. So I think that ending homelessness is good for everyone, because it'll also free us to be more fully human and express our humanity in the way that is compassionate and caring for all.
Thank you. I'm going to wrap us up with one more question. As a reminder, if anyone submitted additional questions, we will be sure to answer them or field them with our guests after today's event. And feel free to continue to pop up with questions on note cards. Just make sure to add an email just in case we don't get to your question. Okay, and maybe we can fit in one more. One question is, how does Nashville's homelessness population compare to other cities like Charlotte, North Carolina, Austin, Texas, Memphis, Tennessee, etc.?
Yeah. You know, it's a funny thing. If you ask, I mean, just sort of think about your own vacations. Any fancy vacation place you go to in the world kind of looks the same, doesn't it? I mean, like all rich people sort of look the same when you go to these vacation places. And when you travel and around city after city, and I know cities mostly from traveling around the areas where poor people live, poverty across this country looks the same. It's like people are struggling, and the universal pain, trauma, sadness is no different. But you know, if you're in Los Angeles or Nashville or Charlotte or Atlanta or DC, it's so familiar, and the stories are all the same. There's a huge group of people that have this is a systemic issue. You know, the racism, the rents, the poverty. For years, we've created a group of people that we have left out, and they are more the same than different. And the thing about them is they're more like us than not like us.
And I did lie. I have one more question also about those forgotten people. So what about the 3,577 people with mental health disorders? At least a percentage of this demographic are not able to live independently. Of the 785 people with developmental disabilities, or 2,637 people with substance use disorders, how would Housing First work for them?
If you think of Housing First as housing and services, like two different components, the question you have to solve is, the person you're trying to house will require a certain level of service. And when is that level of service beyond the capacity of this type of program? There are people that especially on the scattered side, who cannot manage an apartment of their own, no matter how much support you give them. They've become old, or their cognitive functioning, they're not remembering as much. People with developmental disabilities who can't function are not good candidates for this kind of program. So of course, there are people who don't, the model isn't adequate enough. People need either supervised living or assisted living or nursing homes. But you don't know, this is the thing that is most difficult. You don't know who will succeed until you give them the opportunity to try. We don't really have an assessment that says this person will do okay in housing. The only way to figure out how the person is going to do in housing, especially if they want to be housed, is to put them there and support them the best we can. We can't assess someone's swimming skills in a classroom. They have to be in the pool.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you. So I want to remind everybody before we go to break that there are vendors on both sides of the aisles here. So show the people on the right, your right, my left, some love over here. Visit them during the break. A reminder, the bathrooms are out the front door, turn right, and they're over on the left side. And also, we love all the questions you guys are asking. If you don't hear your question asked or answered, please know that we are fielding those questions, and we're trying our best to keep them specific to the topic that the speaker is speaking on. And if there are questions specific to OHS and we have time to get to those questions today, we will do it. But if we don't, please know that your questions will be answered. I don't think anybody is a stranger to Raquel or Allison. So we will make sure that you get your questions answered. And you're going on break a little bit early. And be back at 10:30. Good time, everyone. If you could come on in and have a seat. We're going to get ready for our next speaker. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back, welcome back. Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. I'm Davidson. I know it. Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. Yes, ma'am. All right. We have had fruitful information, and I'm sure there will be fruitful conversation to continue. Thank you so much already to every one of our speakers. Dr. Samson Barris, thank you, April. Thank you, Joseph Marsh. Thank you, Megan. Thank you so much. I guess you guys want me to sing. I can do it. That's not what I'm here for, but I can do it. Would that get everyone in and seated? What would you like to hear? No, I'm kidding. All right. I'm going to pull out my teacher voice in just a minute. It's going to be great going through these questions because you guys ask great questions. Some of the questions you've sent to me, some of them you've already sent to media. Some of them we'll be able to answer easily. Some of them may require help to answer. But we're going to get you answers. All right. We're doing pretty good here. All right, so we are going to go ahead and get started. So our next speaker up is Roseanne Haggerty. Roseanne Haggerty, President and Chief Executive Officer of Community Solutions. She is an internationally recognized leader in developing innovative strategies to end homelessness. Community Solutions assist communities throughout the U.S. and internationally in implementing systems that measurably end homelessness and change the conditions that produce it. Their large-scale initiatives include the 100,000 Home Campaign and Built for Zero. Earlier, Roseanne founded and led Common Ground Community, a pioneer in the development of supportive housing models and other research-based practices that end homelessness. Please welcome Roseanne Haggerty.
Thank you. Well, it is a real thrill to be here with you for Nashville's first State of Homelessness Forum. And it's what a smart idea and a timely idea to celebrate the amazing progress that you've been making together. Learning how to Thank you, Kayla. This conference, this forum is so well timed with just so much to reflect on and be proud of, just incredibly inspiring to know of the reductions in family homelessness through the 100-day challenges, housing 107 people in 60 days, getting the unified housing strategy in place, reducing mortality by 45%. Just amazing, inspiring work happening here. And we're really proud to have partnered with Nashville's team for, over 10 years. Nashville was a bright star in the 100,000 Homes campaign that some of you may remember. And that was from 2010 to 2014. And then in the last 10 years, you've been one of the leaders, especially among large cities, in our Built for Zero network. The by name list and data sophistication that you've all contributed to and that April was describing, truly among large cities that are in our network, Nashville is a leader in kind of the exercising and really demonstrating the discipline to bring everybody together to create a shared picture of the challenge. And we found that data really is the shared vocabulary for getting a community team able to see problems in the same way, see what's working, collaborate, put their resources together toward the common aim of making homelessness rare and brief. And your work here is truly inspiring and setting a standard for other large cities. So thank you for all you do. I thought maybe for those of you who aren't too familiar with Community Solutions, we support Built for Zero, which is a network now of more than 180 continuums of care that are voluntarily learning together what it takes to make homelessness rare and brief. And Built for Zero is also an operating system, a platform for coordinating efforts and resources and information across the community to steadily reduce homelessness. And above all, I think it's a way of working. It's a way of even thinking about the issue. And as you demonstrate, a framework for relentlessly, as a community, putting all of your efforts together around a single goal to prevent and quickly resolve housing crises for anyone needing that support, anyone across the community. I know that's your vision in Nashville, that no one should be in a situation of prolonged homelessness, that those housing emergencies can be shrunk, can be prevented, can be quickly detected, and can be resolved. And you are absolutely showing that that's possible. Well, across the Built for Zero network now, more than 60 communities have achieved sustained reductions in homelessness for at least one group, most often veterans or the chronically homeless. And 15 have reached a standard called functional zero, as you know, and well, these days I'm not sure who actually certifies it in the federal government, but a shorthand way of understanding functional zero is, as a community, you've gotten to a place where your outflow is exceeding your inflow. You know, you basically, you're not stuck in that situation of no matter how hard you're working, more people are experiencing homelessness, that you've actually changed the direction of the river. And you're staying ahead of homelessness, and that's what functional zero means. And we're excited that that's being proven out in many communities now, that it's possible to do that, it's possible to sustain that, and that is a realistic vision for our communities across the country, to not have to see homelessness as inevitable, to understand that we can actually organize our work to make it rare and brief. So I'd love to get into what we and our community partners have been learning about over the last 10 years now, to really, what is it going to take, and where do we see the success coming from? What kind of configuration of activities make the difference? Let me do this manually. I might need Kayla's help again. Okay, good. So what we've learned, and in some ways this is such common sense, but it's not the way historically activities were organized or the issue is understood, or certainly that HUD or other funds actually flowed into communities. But we have learned that the communities that are actually seeing progress and sustaining progress are the ones that never lose sight of this fundamental question. Are all of our programs and investments adding up to the thing we really want, which is equitable reductions in homelessness over time? And if we're not seeing progress, if we're not moving the needle, how quickly can we figure that out, and how quickly, and I'd say how bravely, can we pivot and do something different to get better results? It's so easy to get locked into funding rules and habits, and lose sight of the fact that we have to be learning all the time. And so this learning journey around this question actually has proven to be pretty fundamental to whether a community can make and sustain progress. And within that, we see a pattern that it's essentially three things that are helping communities answer this question. And they are using a platform, Built for Zero or another, some operating system that enables them to coordinate their efforts, their resources, and to measure progress toward this goal of homelessness, rare and brief, functional zero. They have some system that is actually telling them in real time whether what they're doing is adding up to what they want. That system also tells them, points out, like, where are the barriers, and constantly kind of guides this community team into, like, what do we have to do differently and what do we try. Secondly, these are all communities that are increasing the supply of housing, and not just by the numbers, but they're increasing the range and types of housing options that they're making available. And they're doing it fast. They're looking at their existing assets, not thinking that it's all going to be tax credit buildings that will open 5-7 years from now. But what do they have to work with now that can be put to use as housing? And they're bringing that kind of urgent attention to it. And then lastly, and this is something that's really emerged, and I'll say more about this later, in the last year or so, the communities that are making the most progress are doing the best job of inspiring the public to believe and expect that homelessness can be made rare and brief in their community. And just in general, they are telling a different story, not of need or urgency, but they're telling a story of confidence, of hope, and what this community, and I would never bet against Nashville, this community is possible of doing because of people's love for their community. They're actually leaning into the capacity of the community to come together and do important things together. And so I'm going to go through, what these communities are doing in these three areas. And then, because the other thing we've just seen again and again, we're going to talk about implementation, that it's like the how these approaches come together and actually get done matters as much as whether these are good ideas. Because learning to execute and a kind of complex response to a dynamic problem, that takes some real discipline around learning and always looking at how things are coming together and how they can be improved. So here's what we have learned and is part of the Built for Zero operating system. And I think, even communities are making progress on any front are doing, doing this essentially. They're organizing around a shared aim. They have a really clear goal that all of their activities are feeding into, that North Star of making homelessness rare and brief, getting to functional zero. All of their activities are being measured against that. Everybody's showing up for the same project. They're working increasingly across organizations, government agencies, city and county agencies and state agencies as a nimble, integrated team. It's not my program, your program, go to meetings where you basically report on what you're doing. This is like really joined at the hip in the way, for instance, in emergency management, you're all working toward the same project. You're sharing the same information. You're kind of letting organizations lead if this is their expertise and this is the challenge, and vice versa. It's a lot more fluid. I was describing this model to someone in Nashville yesterday, and he said, "Oh, we do that all the time with our music. It's just like the metaphor here isn't the emergency command center, it's the band. Everybody brings what they've got, but they're playing from the same script, and they're playing from the same sheet of music." And so that notion of a nimble, integrated team, maybe that is the thing that Nashville can bring this work, really building out this metaphor of the band. The communities are making progress only when they really have their handle around what are the dimensions of homelessness? What's happening this week, this month, not what the pit count says. And the fact that Nashville is really crushing it as far as by name data, real-time data, everybody using HMIS, that really explains a great deal of the success you're seeing. And then we heard from Joseph about one of the things very smartly that you've built into your plan for your ARPA dollars. You've built in some flexibility. This is where I'm telling the people who live this every day, like, we've got to find ways to show up with what people need, not simply what we've got as an organization. And so creating that space for flexible resources, also flexible types of housing, because not everyone needs the same thing. Not everyone wants the same thing. Not everyone will be successful at a particular moment in the same type of environment. And so having some flexibility in terms of the housing options. And then one of the things that I think is particularly helpful for our Built for Zero network is we're able to pool what everybody's doing and what's working, and because only a certain set of problems that seem to manifest in different ways. But why reinvent the wheel if you can be in touch with other communities who are figuring out what's working, what the challenges are, and you can draw from their experience and the menu of strategies that other communities have been testing. And so, operating system. Second point, communities are making progress who are leaning into not just numbers of new housing units they're putting online, but how they use their existing property assets, and also how they create a much more flexible array of housing options. This is a slide showing some of the projects we built back in the day in New York before we moved into really focusing on the systems work. But it's a way of basically illustrating the kind of properties that cities have that often kind of they start off being sort of weird, troubled properties, whether it's an old SRO or an old commercial cubicle hotel or an office building that, as in the case of the one on the upper right, more relevant today than ever with the opportunity to convert office buildings to housing, and this new construction building on the lower right. What's interesting about that is an old urban renewal site over a subway line, and so it didn't seem to be buildable. But every city has these kinds of assets of, often they're like the weird site you don't know how to develop, something that's owned by a city agency, a property that might be owned by an institution that is not using it fully. And so these kinds of ideas around what do you have, how do you put it to use quickly and create flexibility so that maybe people don't need to sign a lease, or there are no barriers to whether you can stay a month or 6 months. Some of the variations that we've learned are important, are ones you see showing up in communities that are really kind of making more and sustained progress. And then lastly, on this point of telling a new story, it's been, I think, an interesting moment for all of us, knowing as we've heard today, that Nashville is doing such powerful work and seeing such strong results. I'll bet most of the people who live in Nashville and think about homelessness don't know that. We have not been very good as a field of telling a story in ways that the general public and especially civic leaders can understand that there is a way to get your arms around this issue, and to have this be something that a whole community can understand and support. And I've got this slide up of a really one snap from a powerful series of stories the New York Times did on Houston. And of course, Houston has this very deserved sort of iconic status as a large city that has just done extraordinary and consistently effective work driving down homelessness. They reduced homelessness. It's moving up a bit, but they had gotten to a place a few years ago where they'd reduced it almost 70%. And one of the things that Houston has done and has become a real, I think, important object of study and something that we can all learn from is not just done everything that I've mentioned, a strong operating system, everybody rowing in the same direction, investing in housing, but they have been very, very savvy about how they tell their story. You go back and read this New York Times series, like they've got everyone from the mayor to business leaders to people from county government to people experiencing homelessness to people at the not-for-profits. They're all saying the same thing, and they're all talking about Houston as a can-do city, that this is a common project, and that cohesion, that sense of like the shared project, what the goals are, the broad commitment. I think that this is a very powerful signal for all communities about how you tell the story differently, not maybe in the ways that we understand it. Like, I think we're all maybe a little guilty of, showing up to meetings and we start talking about HMIS and coordinated entry, and, that's not the way people understand this issue. It's like, do I see fewer people experiencing homelessness? How do I make sense of that? Who did what? And how to translate that reality to a broad audience, and also how to be sensitive to who are the messengers that are trusted in the community beyond the not-for-profits, who I think, like it or not, folks will say, well, they have a stake in promoting the work or being hopeful. Having other folks who understand it and talk about this as a community goal, a community commitment, a source of community pride and success is really important. And so let me turn now to the implementation side of things. I've led you through the what we're seeing as far as the operating system, housing, and the new story that characterize communities that are really making progress and sustaining progress. But how do you do all this? Well, starting again back with the operating system, this notion of the accountable team, the command center, the band, this is something that communities have to do voluntarily. There's nothing in any of the funding that any of us receives that require us to basically work with humility and partnership for the greater good. Like, we're all responsible for our own programs, and yet this is the job that April and her team have taken on. That the COC is here in Nashville really owning this outcome of it all has to add up to what we all want most, but it's about voluntary participation in that shared goal. And so the communities that have had a leader like your own COC say, we will be responsible not just for applying for and complying with HUD funds, but for really being the conveners of the implementation of not just reporting using HMIS and being in compliance, but actually using data as a tool to hold all our efforts together, to understand what's working, what isn't, to use as a learning system as far as if we're getting stuck here and we see length of stays really being pushed out, how do we come together with all of the assets and capabilities of the organizations in the community to try something new, to test something new, to adjust what we've been doing. And so this notion of the team, it's not the kind of collaboration that any of us doing the work had ever been trained to do, frankly. You probably are better off drawing on if you've been in a band or on a soccer team. It's that kind of ethic of really all on the field together, doing what you have to do to get to the goal. The other part of being able to function in this operating system toward results is having the right data. Like, we all collect so much data and have to report so much data to funders and for various purposes. But what we found is that there are really 7 things that matter. And if you've got your whole team looking at the same data points, week over week, month over month, that you're really focusing on the right things and you're kind of limiting the noise. You need to know how many people are actively homeless at any given time, but you need to be understanding the particulars of inflow and outflow, because it really begins to open up the fact that there are so many different solutions waiting to be tested. Because on the inflow side, if you aren't familiar with whether this person or this family you're working with is experiencing homelessness for the first time, or just returned from having been assisted in housing, or had been seen last year and then disappeared, you're missing so many opportunities to understand the dynamics of homelessness and how to intervene. For someone returning from having been assisted with housing, that's a certain set of problems. Was there an issue with the landlord or the support services? Did something break down in that family's experience that can be corrected, so the chance they have of succeeding the next time is infinitely enhanced if you know that information. If you are treating someone who's experiencing homelessness for the first time as in the same way, then you're missing an opportunity to learn a lot about prevention. Like, what happened? What did they try to do before they became homeless? And what were the experiences where, if a resource or something worked differently, that could have been avoided? And then it's always been one of the great mysteries in the work, because you don't often know if you stop seeing someone at your shelter or your program. You hope for the best. They find housing on their own. But if you're not sort of separating out and asking what happened to you, if you're returning onto the radar a year later or 10 months later, that's where you find out a lot about the overlap between the hospitalization, the criminal justice system, and also, importantly, what people tried to do to help themselves. And for the next step in assisting them, how do you strengthen that outcome? And then on the outflow side, the game is all about accelerating outflow, accelerating housing placements. And that housing placement goal, you want to be tracking, as well as tracking people who are apparently resolving homelessness on their own. So it just becomes, these data points become a source of a very different conversation. Again, an operating system that points you at the critical data as opposed to all of the stuff that you have to use for reports is incredibly helpful. And just to kind of illustrate, we were just pretty dazzled at Nashville's success with the 100-day sprints to reduce family homelessness. But we find that being able to map your data like this, it just helps the whole community understand the impact of your collective work if you can not just have data, but display it in ways that demystify, like the whole experience of working to drive a number down, and to see that kind of progression is so much more compelling than just a set of numerals on the page. So I'm also going to shift gears here a little bit to the last piece of implementation thinking around housing. I made the point earlier that the communities that are really showing and sustaining progress and reductions are getting super creative about how they identify opportunities to house people and expand their supply and widen the range of options. Well, I'm excited that my colleague Dave Foster is able to join us today, because he's the guy who figured this all out. But one of the things that is, we're thrilled to be working with Nashville to do one of our early projects, but is something that we're doing around the country, and I guess about 9 large cities right now, is just going out and buying existing housing. One of the things that's crazy making is when you have individuals and families with vouchers and no landlords who will take them. And so what we've done, and I think it's striking that we've had such a good response, is we've raised private corporations now.
Testing, 1, 2. Testing, 1, 2, 3, testing. We apologize. And no, I am not going to sing. Let's try. Turn it down. Turn it down just a little. Testing. This one is off. Testing, 1, 2, 3, testing. I think this might be it.
All right, thank you. All right. Well, thank you. Well done. So anyway, we've been able to raise about $185 million from corporations, foundations, high net worth individuals to go out and buy existing housing and market rate housing and tie it up as permanently affordable. And as there's natural turnover, pledge those units to the local COC for the next veteran or chronically homeless individual with a voucher on the list. And one of the early projects we acquired was Glastonbury Woods here in South Nashville. And one of the funders here who, and essentially we're in the midst of raising Fund 2 now. Fund 2 is basically a 10-year investment that we're asking folks to make about 9.25%, 9.5% return. So you're not giving your money away, but you're taking less than you would possibly make in the stock market, and really concretely solving a problem in your community. And so this is about a $20 million project, but it was basically available to people coming from homelessness in a matter of months, as opposed to the usual, using a low-income housing tax credit approach that takes years. And we've been able to acquire about just over 1,300 units in 14 projects in 7 cities in the last couple of years, and we're expanding that now. But here's an answer for how do you take an existing asset and actually link it to your housing strategy? Really powerful idea, and the response has been terrific. And just bringing resources into this this whole journey with us that we had really, as a sector, never thought to tap at this scale. So here's an idea to scale, and we hope to keep doing more projects in Nashville. Another really exciting project that we are talking up in this space of use your existing assets, move fast, be creative, kind of look outside your typical way of working, is this project called The Melody in Atlanta. This is basically it's a sort of a hybrid of shipping container buildings that have been adapted to be studio apartments and modular construction. But this was up in 4 months on city-owned land in Atlanta. It's one of Mayor Dixon's first projects in his target of 500 units for people coming from homeless that are designed as micro units. But in the United States, generally, we've been kind of slow in adapting to what most of the rest of the world uses as prefabricated construction. And so this has really been an incredibly successful project. And all of the component parts actually are available to be deployed in any community. But one of the things that Atlanta did, and I will go into a little bit more detail about this later, but to enable this, they had done a comprehensive mapping project of all of their city-owned land, including what does the Public Works Department own? What does the school district own? Because there had never been a comprehensive record of all of these different opportunities to identify and put to use for housing purposes something that was within the city's control. Another really smart steal this idea concept. All over the country, there's been a shift since COVID, and for a variety of reasons, online learning and just generational changes around colleges and universities having far fewer students on campus. There are examples all over the country of kind of shrinkage in student body, real estate that's underutilized, and colleges closing, actually. Well, here's something that we think, should be on everybody's radar. Burlington, Vermont, one of their supportive housing organizations worked with St. Michael's College and then also the University of Vermont to buy an empty dormitory. This is now 64 units of housing. Somehow, our mind carves out these different kinds of residential arrangements into different buckets. They were able to move people quite quickly into something that had been for years and years a dormitory but was out of use. And there was some adjacent graduate student housing that they purchased for families from the University of Vermont that is now putting a dent in family homelessness there. So be looking around for institutional properties that could have a new life. In fact, I think this should be the default option if colleges or universities or any kind of institution with residential type properties is faltering or needing to really think about the needs of the wider community if they have residential type properties available. And then to say a bit more about Atlanta, and in the spirit of implementation is everything. You need to have the right ideas, you need to have the right team, but you really have to be on it in terms of how do we work as effectively as possible as a team and change things up. Atlanta and Mayor Dixon are setting the pace in a pretty exciting way. And I know Mayor O'Donnell and the really terrific work behind the Unified Housing Strategy is probably familiar with this and drawing on it as the implementation thinking is going on. But Mayor Dixon created a Housing Command Center, which he chairs, and something they call the Housing Strike Force. Now, this is heads of or kind of senior leaders in 13 different city agencies that meet biweekly, and their job is to clear the path. They started off with, I think the mayor had run on a pledge of building 20,000 units of housing by 2030, and they got into it a few months and like, this is not working. And so they changed course and really leaned into this concept of the band and what is basically in front of us that we can unlock. So they grabbed the previous mayor's housing strategy. Like, who cares? It's done. There's some support for it. It's got some good ideas. So something that they were able to get moving on some projects that had some pre-work done. They started rummaging around the building department to see where are housing projects that we are just for no apparent reason torturing, because they could move a whole lot more quickly if we relax some regulations or sped up the review process. They did this mapping project of all of their city land and started talking to folks in other cities about how to use more innovative construction technologies like the shipping container project that I showed you. Those were shipping containers that, if they weren't now providing permanent housing in Atlanta, would be like a site office for a construction company somewhere. Like these products exist already. They've just repurposed them for their purpose. And then they even went pretty far afield. They got some powerful ideas from Denmark. They realized that they could accelerate development if they created their own public development authority. And so this is, so this notion of looking around to see where you have possibilities and value in assets and in capabilities that may exist already in your community. They are now 3 years in. They have already gotten 11,000 units into construction or completed. So they went from oh my God, that was a really bad idea to run on that pledge to they are upping their numbers. And so this notion of how you implement, this kind of brings us back to the operating system. How do you keep everybody on the same page, focused on the same goal? Comfortable and courageous in changing it up if you're off track. Feeling free enough and supported enough to go get somebody else's idea and bring them into your city. And so I think in some ways, the communities that are getting the job done are the low ego communities, the proudest communities with the lowest ego because they're focused on getting the job done. And then just to wrap up, this idea of the new story has really kind of possessed us in the last year or so, because I think I tend to think of it as we're living in the time of two stories. We have, as Sam described, just this kind of looming threat about housing resources and other support resources that we've leaned on for so long not being guaranteed. We have more conversation than ever happening in the country about our housing shortages and how they are affecting probably every family, every business, every community's ability to, staff its hospital and, have essential workers living close enough to not have to spend hours and ridiculous sums of money traveling. This notion of, the country is at a boiling point and seeking answers for the housing crisis that so many people feel and are touched by. And yet, we also have the stories we've been hearing this morning about Nashville. 107 people housed in 60 days. 100-day challenges that have reduced family homelessness by hundreds of people. A community that is working together in this increasingly aligned and disciplined ways. Why aren't those stories known? The country is hungry for them. And so one of the things that we've done in the last year, we did this quite extensive communications research project to try to get to the bottom of, how do we tell the story differently? And what we learned, and we studied Houston pretty closely, is that a few things really shape the national story. As Sam mentioned, unsheltered homelessness, while it's by no means the dominant numerically part of the problem, it is what absorbs the public in terms of their imagined sense of homelessness. So we just have to lean into unsheltered homelessness. There has to be visible change and then an accompanying story about who did what to resolve this. Because as in this research project, we had 75 individual interviews, 3 workshops, 12 focus groups. I spoke with everyone from mayors to business leaders, to people experiencing homelessness, to COC leaders, to healthcare leaders, and journalists. And this notion of tackling visible homelessness, telling the story clearly of who did what to get folks into a stable situation, that has to happen to make everything else we're doing believable and a source of confidence to our broader communities. We also learned that the people who tell the story, we have to have a much bigger array of allies. Civic leaders, people who are not seen as having kind of some self-interest, but can speak on behalf of the community in a way that is bringing a confidence that we're on it. That it's going to be different in every community, but who are the civic leaders who are going to be trusted, and how to educate them and engage them as being kind of the voices of possibility. And then we've spent a lot of time, the royal we, people working on homelessness, and this probably has included communications projects you've done at your agencies. I think we've spent a lot of time inadvertently talking to each other and not finding out what the broad public needs to feel that the norms have changed, that expectations can be different, and to really help hold our communities and ultimately our country into a new understanding that this is a solvable problem. And so we're in the midst now with some vanguard cities of doing specific focus group and message testing research, polling, to really figure out what are the common threads around helping communities tell their story, and realizing that all of the good work we do, we have to make it more visible, we have to make it more comprehensible, and my suspicion, based on what we're learning already, is that this is a story of community pride. And those are going to be the kinds of messages that resonate as we go through this next rigorous phase of our communications research. And so, I am so honored to be in a place that is getting the work done, that is such a beacon for the rest of the country. And we look forward to working with you in the years ahead. Thank you.
All right, just like before with Dr. Simbaris, if you have any questions, there is Raquel, and just raise your hand up, and we probably will not be able to answer all of them, but we will do our best to answer as many as we can and pick up on central themes. So here's one question we got. Can you share more about how the Melody was funded, and more about what social housing is, how it can help with our housing crisis, because we have our first social housing proposal for our metro budget in Nashville right now.
Well, on the Melody in Atlanta, and I would say it helps to have the World Cup coming. It gets everybody's attention. And so they've been able to raise an awful lot of private philanthropic dollars as well as city dollars. And so they had put aside, I think, $150 million for housing for those experiencing homelessness. And just like your terrific unified housing strategy, Atlanta has embedded addressing and really getting to an end state on unsheltered homelessness into their overall housing plan. It's not like this standalone issue. It's deeply embedded into their housing strategy. And so it's the dollars that they've raised for the implementation of the homelessness piece that they've used to fund the Melody. And on social housing, I don't know that there's one definition of it. I think it may be basically housing that is owned and managed in the public interest, but it could have a particular meaning here in Nashville since there's a specific proposal that's been referred to. But I think as you sensed in my sharing the story of Glastonbury Woods here in South Nashville, getting more property into not-for-profit or public ownership, really well-managed property, is one of the things that's going to ease our housing supply dilemma. Just to take the incentive to sell out of the equation, because basically one of the other things that I think is bubbling up in the atmosphere nationally is maybe housing shouldn't be a commodity. Maybe it's community infrastructure.
Speaking, I think a related question is, how much money and how do you think Nashville would need to go about raising that money? How much money would we need to make a model like that work?
The Melody? Well, I can put you in touch with the folks in Atlanta. They can probably actually give you the term sheet, because you might as well just go to the same folks who did who supplied the shipping containers. I think what made it more affordable, of course, is they use city-owned land, and so that brings the cost down. And I don't know the per unit cost, but it's easy to find. And whoever asked the question, come find me, and I'll hook you up with the guy who oversaw the project.
How much money total in Nashville?
I think it's. I guess it depends on what the North Star is. There's a 90,000 unit goal in the unified housing strategy, but if we're talking just about what's it going to take to get to outflow overcoming inflow into homelessness, I don't know if that's been broken out in the plan. Can anyone answer that question? Well, we did get okay.
We're working with Rachel Cook on the inflow and outflow and the mapping in our HMIS system, so that we can have a system designed just like that. Okay. We just have to get it approved through our HMIS data committee.
Okay, great. Are you asking, sir, the number of people who have to, or the amount of money? Whatever the number is, and what, could you give me like a range? April, is it like 1,000 people chronically homeless?
It's in the book. In 1 year's time, there was 3,000. In 1 year's time, that's not that's still experiencing chronic homelessness, but it's in the book that's right in front of you.
Yeah, but whatever the number is in terms of per unit cost, it's something Nashville can afford, because you're spending more than that running those people through hospitals, the police response, everything. And, you know, as tough as this issue is, it's so easy to forget this is completely a last mile problem. Nashville has housed, I'm sure, based on the numbers, well over 99% of its people. This is the last mile, and it can be done anywhere. And this kind of spirit, I would not doubt, is capable of delivering that.
All right, here is a question about family homelessness. So what would you suggest to support family homelessness, and why is it important to address it?
Well, you all are doing really fabulous work on family homelessness. The sprints that have driven those numbers down are ones that, you know, we share the data like to inspire other communities. It's important to end all homelessness, you know, and because we can, we should. I mean, one of the best predictors, just as one reason, one of the best predictors of whether you experience homelessness in your life is whether you previously experienced it. And all of these children who experience homelessness, they have this like pre-orientation, you know, and it's gotta haunt us as far as how it interrupts education, undermines health, gets in the way of people being able to hold a meaningful job and contribute to their community. Back to this point of housing as community infrastructure. Yeah, you're pretty stuck in life, and to tolerate that for children, I think, is something no one feels is acceptable.
All right. Will buying out market units for affordable housing increase the cost of the rest of housing that remains under traditional private management? And how could we prevent such a thing from happening?
Yeah, interesting question. Well, I think the answer to lots of things is scale. Like if you think that the pie is like this, yeah, you'll upset the economics if all of a sudden, you know, you're buying everything for a certain purpose. But if you're changing the shape of the pie, you know, like that's the key. Like you just need a much more dynamic housing market, as your unified housing strategy indicates. And so that's probably the answer. And I think that's my phone. I thought I turned it on. Sorry.
All right. How can we work locally to mitigate inflow issues when such large systemic issues like poverty, racism, and an equitable healthcare system that are often operating federally have significant impact on inflow?
That is absolutely the right set of questions, but communities are doing it. I'll tell you that the things that make a big difference is, involve like enlisting your landlord community. We heard Sam talk about, and some of the questions were about engaging landlords. Landlords don't feel particularly good having to evict anyone, or if they have a tenant who's having a challenge. How do we kind of create more of a blended partnership model where if folks are struggling with their housing, you can get help settling things, or at least trying to find some way through those tough situations upstream, as opposed to after people have lost their housing. We know that there are certain institutional experiences, like and in the criminal justice system and the foster care system, if you are coming from a long-term hospitalization. Like all of these institutions, I think, the conversation has moved, profoundly. And Richard Cho is here and was one of the developers of the FUSE program around from the criminal justice system, making sure in places where it's been implemented that no one is discharged to homelessness. But we do have all of these opportunities where the people are in housing crisis, they are in touch with an institution, and yet the linkages aren't well made to, get the right people involved to kind of introduce some alternatives. Some of the work that has to be done is in that space of transitions, and to really strengthen those ties. In some ways, back to the band analogy, what we find in the communities in our Built for Zero network that are getting closest to functional zero for all, and there are several communities that are going to be there in the next year or so, you'll find that who's in their band, who's at their table, they've got like the code enforcement lady, the head of the federally qualified healthcare center. They've got the fire marshal. Like, they've realized who are the folks who see and understand people are moving into crisis before the crisis happens. And I think building that kind of community infrastructure, even in the face of cuts to federal programs, will become more important.
All right, we have one last question. We have a lot of decision makers in this room. I believe one of our chief decision makers just walked in. But what can the specific decision makers in this room do to end chronic homelessness in Nashville right now?
Just be committed to that goal and get everybody working toward that single goal. It's so easy to get distracted as any of us, but certainly as a leader with a million different things demanding your attention. But we have seen over and over again, if the leader is really focused on that, is asking for the data every week, tell me where we are on that, it tends to happen.
Thank you so much. Oh, sure.
You mentioned that the communities are doing it. You just said it. And what we aren't talking about is how many years that they have worked to get to this point of doing it. We have to understand that the question about all these different causes play into it. Criminal justice system, foster care, all these things. Well, based on where we are now nationally, those numbers are coming again, and those numbers are going to increase. So the communities who are doing it now are going to, after all the work they've done, are going to see another large number of people falling into homelessness. And so are we making plans for this surge that is coming after we have done it?
Thank you, Mr. Gentry. All right.
Well, I particularly like this question because it's a reminder that, we have to be thinking, at the right scale. It's going to be so important for every issue that states and cities get aligned, that they're doing mutually reinforcing things. As the federal government's policies change, more is going to fall on states, and there has to be this kind of shared commitment to what do we have to do, what do we have to adjust to kind of blunt the impact or even seize new opportunities. But the other reason your question is important is when you look around the country, even just the last 6 months, floods in Kentucky and in Virginia, and fires in California and the Pacific Northwest, so many people are kind of at risk, and kind of housing conditions are being affected by forces that we're not even planning for. And I think maybe the vision we all need to start kind of articulating is, how do we have resilient housing systems that can provide affordability, can provide safety, can provide equitable access, and can withstand shocks? I think we just have to be thinking about housing in new ways for all the reasons you described, and just kind of looking around at kind of the reality of what's causing displacement. It's not just economic displacement.
All right. Thank you so much, Roseanne Haggerty.
We are right on time. I can't believe it. Even with the long break, we're going to have a little bit of a lunch in a little bit, but we're going to have a town hall chat with one of our Nashville natives that a lot of you have had the privilege of leading beside, learning with, and serving alongside of. I don't know of any other community. I like to brag about this just because it's great. I don't know of any other community that has a mayor in place that served on the Homeless Planning Council. I don't know of any other community that has a mayor in place that was the chair of our HMIS data committee. I don't know of any other community that has a mayor that helped to draft the original strategy that we have refurbished and refreshed that we're going to talk about a little later on today. If you know of any other community that has a current seated mayor that did all of those things prior to going into civic leadership, raise your hand. So I would like to say our very own, first and only, I get to say that because nobody raised their hand, Mayor Freddie O'Connell is here today. This is sensitive.
So I'm very excited about this. For
more than me.
Oh, your mic.
Yeah, can everybody hear me okay? Yeah.
I'm going to move it up a little bit.
I can do it.
Okay, you got it.
I can try. All right. How's that? Everybody hear me okay still?
All right. So I'm excited. The community is excited. Unbelievable number of questions. We've done our best to categorize them and be very sensitive of your time. So before I get started, I want to give you an opportunity to just address Nashville. Everyone is here. You have community partners, business owners, landlords, advocates, case managers. You have Nashville in the room.
Yeah. Demetrius, thank you. Thank you to the Office of Homeless Services, April Calvin. Thanks to all the partners. Especially national folks who have come in for this. Appreciate the attention to this. And then thank you to everyone who has shown up today. I know we have providers in the room, partners in the room, people who are focused on housing, people who are focused on services, people who are focused on advocacy, people who are focused on shelter. And I think what I think most about today is ultimately this has to be an uncomfortable conversation and series of conversations because we're not at that point as a city and as a community. Despite everything April said in the introduction, all of which is true, it doesn't make this work easier. It doesn't make the solutions easier. It doesn't make the landscape of state and federal interaction with the ability to solve these problems easier. So we're all challenged as we sit here today, and my hope is that in embracing those challenges, that all of us, whether you're a Metro employee, whether you're in any of those other scenarios I described earlier, that we leave here today recommitted to the task of trying to find the greatest spaces of togetherness and work as closely as possible to at least develop the housing crisis resolution system that I think is within reach and prepare ourselves for a future where I hope that Nashville can become a community as we aspire to it to end chronic homelessness and talk about what that means. So thank you all for being here. Thanks for the work that has gone into today. Thank you for the level of partnership, and thank you for being a part of a process that we know involves both passion and trust and in some cases profound disagreement about approaches, and ultimately I hope leads to more people being committed to helping us discover the justice of housing and housing as a human right.
Thank you, Mayor. So I have broken these questions down into 7 different categories, and you'll see them there on the screen. And I did my very best to just be representative of everyone's concerns. So Mayor, Nashville continues to grow at a rapid pace, economically, culturally, and demographically. But with the growth comes growing pains. With the city of Nashville constantly evolving, what is your long-term vision for the people who call Nashville home?
Yeah, I think at a basic level, for me, for having grown up here, for having experienced a half century of that evolution firsthand, there are many parts of it that are exciting. There are many things that I think are experiences, opportunities that I hope that we continue to attract and hang on to as a city. There are many things that are traditions, whether they be gathering spots or favorite meet and threes that I hope we hang on to. And there will always be new ideas. I think Nashville, having set itself apart from other cities in many ways, is a cultural destination, both as a great place to live and visit, will continue to attract people. And so ultimately, I think what the conversation I wanted to have with the city a couple of years ago and the work that I've wanted to do in this role is to do everything within our reach and within our power to make it possible and easier for people to choose to stay here if they're here, and also to make it possible for us to welcome people who have discovered that Nashville is a great place to live as they seek opportunities, and whether they want to participate in the music industry or come here for a job, or whether they have grown up here and been in our school system and see themselves in future roles in the economy. I think first is the principle of being able to comfortably stay, and beyond that, as many people as possible to have the opportunity to thrive. And I think some of those things are things we want to be intentional about. I think it's amazing to be Music City, USA. I think it's amazing to be the Athens of the South. And I think at the end of the day, too, we should be a city that is setting the standard as much as possible for how to get policy right, and acknowledge that we have to get that right in a constrained landscape where local policy preferences and values may not align with state and federal for quite some time. Yep.
Residents are noticing new developments all around, especially high-rise and luxury apartments. But for many, affordability still remains out of reach. Over the past 4 years, we've seen a surge in apartment construction. But with high rents, how is this construction helping if the units aren't affordable to most Nashvillians?
Yeah, I think a couple of thoughts on that. One, there is no city, there's no community where constraining the supply of housing helps with cost. Two, that's not the only thing we're building. In fact, just in the few years I've been in office, I have personally attended not just groundbreakings, but ribbon cuttings for thousands and thousands of long-term and deeply affordable units, maybe the most important of which was Strobel House last year, which is our first public permanent supportive housing facility. This is a big deal. We're trying to accelerate development of scenarios like that. Just yesterday, we were out in Goodlettsville for the ribbon cutting at Stonebridge Lofts, which is 311 new affordable homes in Goodlettsville. We have been at ribbon cuttings for Park Center facilities. We have been at ribbon cuttings for multiple Holiday Ventures properties, Elmington. We've got a lot of mission-driven developers. Our faith-based community has really entered the conversation in an important way. In my own neighborhood, we just broke ground on an Inspiritus-driven development that will offer dozens of new affordable housing units for seniors and people living with disabilities, while also adding arts-based and food-based services at ground floor. So at that intersection where Inspiritus came out of the ground, we have really 4 key scenarios that show how important all of these housing opportunities are. The first 2 things that were there before I moved to the neighborhood were Cheatham Place, which is a large MDHA residential community, and the Nashville Rescue Mission's Women and Family Campus. A few years ago, a market rate apartment building did get constructed on one of the corners, and now the fourth corner is converting a church property with an outbuilding into those dozens of affordable homes. So we have public housing, subsidized housing, a shelter facility with transitional housing on site, and market housing all on one major intersection that's part of a transit corridor with walking distance to parks and libraries and other public facilities, relatively easy access to multiple places of food. And so I would say, yes, we do see a lot of market rate residential construction, but that's because people want to be here and some of them can afford to pay market rate. It would be even worse if we didn't have as much overall construction. We just received the Unified Housing Strategy from the Housing Division at Metro Planning, and it is not just saying, let's only build affordable housing. It's a recognition that in order for everybody to have access to secure and stable housing in the city, we need housing of multiple types, housing for multiple income levels. And so I would say the formula does not say let's exclusively build only very low-income affordable housing. It says generally, let's build housing.
Looking ahead, many are wondering where this trajectory is taking us. What do you predict the future of Nashville will look like for workers, families, and vulnerable communities?
I think I would say I'm optimistic about the future, and I think about more often than not, just given where our challenges are, that we have to recognize that we live in a state that prefers to be in a low revenue environment. For most Tennesseans, that as a city, we frequently have to lead the charge and find the collective will and interest in tackling big problems. But I would say, because in November we took a massive generational step to help with transportation costs, this is a way that for a generation now we should be able to help anybody in working class conditions, frankly anybody in a variety of conditions, be able to bend their transportation cost curve down as an individual or as a family. Because Choose How You Move was approved by so many voters in November, it gives us dedicated funding to do that. Having the Unified Housing Strategy in hand now as a decade-long benchmarkable framework for achieving that goal of 90,000 homes developed in our 526 square miles. We have not only strategies for how Metro can be engaged, we have strategies for how the broader community can be engaged, and it specifically incorporates strategies that are meant to help unhoused residents and neighbors. So I think we're going to continue to make progress, and so I try to stay grounded in both the acknowledgement of the challenges and acknowledgement of the progress, and staying aspirational at every point. So I think we're going to make a lot of measurable, visible progress, but I do think the city is going to continue to grow and change, and I think there are a variety of scenarios. If you think about just even recent federally led enforcement activity, if you think about changes in state law, we are frequently going to have to contend with things we didn't ask for, that we didn't request, and we have to grapple with nonetheless.
We're going to move on. All right, I think I'm here now. We're going to move on to another category, housing affordability and the crisis of cost. A national study shows that every $100 increase in median rent can lead to a 9% increase in homelessness in major cities. Nashville ranks among the top 9% most expensive cities globally. Is it time to place restrictions or regulations on corporate developers and landlords contributing to these rising rents?
Well, again, this comes back to the constraints we have to acknowledge. Right now, Tennessee is not a state that offers much in the way of renter protection. We do not have strong renters' rights across the entire state of Tennessee. That means in Nashville, it's very challenging to have strong renters' rights. What we have done locally to try to offset that is to a few years ago began offering eviction right to counsel. We have maintained that. We're going to continue to maintain that so that people confronted with scenarios that may be landlord-driven at least have the opportunity to engage legal counsel either for free or at extremely low cost. That is one small step. I think beyond that, though, we're trying to engage very quickly in the first year of the Unified Housing Strategy to continue to offer an increasingly large supply of affordable homes. I think tackling it from the standpoint of what we can do, taking advantage of every new tool in the toolkit. The state has actually offered us some new voluntary incentives. The state has offered us some new scenarios for affordable housing bonds, and we are going to take a look at all of these things to continue to look at things on the supply side, and where we can't offer regulatory approaches, we're going to try to offer supports through programs like the Eviction Right to Counsel program. I would say, too, this is a great opportunity to engage the number of partners who are in this room. We know that the Community Foundation of Middle Tennessee is joining us in multiple different ways right now. They are initiating kind of an accountability and accelerator group to make sure that the Unified Housing Strategy gets implemented alongside what we're trying to do in Metro. We need to continue to engage a lot of the community that we're talking about that is bringing different types of growth into the city and the philanthropic scenario. We just launched a Catalyst Fund last year that's had its first couple of projects underway, its first couple of loans issued. It is almost fully funded, and we want to get it fully funded. We are going to continue to invest in the tools that we have as much as we can, but we need to go forward knowing that Metro can't be the only entity investing in these scenarios.
Many parents, single parents, feel priced out of the very city they serve. What specific steps is your administration taking to bring rents and housing costs within reach of everyday people?
So again, we were very fortunate, and I give Mayor Cooper, who preceded me in this role, a lot of credit. We were at the top of the heap for cities across the country that leveraged one-time pandemic-related federal funding and put a lot of it into housing. In fact, we put $50 million specifically into homelessness mitigation on top of hundreds of millions of additional dollars that went into things like the Barnes Housing Trust Fund and others. Where that has left us is we are trying within this budget to make a lot of headway. The budget we've recommended to Metro Council that was on public hearing last night, it has the largest local-only overall investment in housing that we've made as a city. The Unified Housing Strategy has given us new tools and things to try. Some of those are in startup phase. The Permanent Supportive Housing Acceleration Project is going to need some study and some staffing. Some of the other things will need staffing. They won't immediately lead to housing construction, and so we need to keep that part moving quickly as well. I think Angie Hubbard, who I see on representing the Housing Division, just told me that we've had one of the largest ever allocations from the Barnes Housing Trust Fund into the market, and those funds get leveraged very successfully by mission-driven developers for a variety of types of projects. We have seen more very low-income projects. We've seen some cooperative housing models out in the world. So we're trying to innovate as much as we can. And then within the budget, too, we are trying to make life a little bit easier for some of those families by the second largest new investment in this budget is a restructured pay plan for Metro that makes it the second largest investment in the overall budget. We are trying to tackle not just increases in living wage, but increases for Metro employees, both at the start and all the way through the end of their careers in Metro. And so we are trying to elevate wages as much as we can while also invest in new strategies and continue investing in what works.
With homelessness rising, Nashvillians want to understand what's working and what's not working. What specific metrics are being used to measure the performance of our continuum of care and the Office of Homeless Services? Part B, who oversees this data? And how are we doing on our goals to reduce homelessness?
Yeah, going back to April's point, I think one of the key metrics is how well our overall implementation of HMIS is going. I have been incredibly pleased that some of the work that I did when I was still serving on the committee has paid off in the form of both more providers participating and, frankly, the greatest overall set of data we've had. So I think successes in HMIS is one metric. We need to continue making sure we're making progress there. We do have an Office of Performance Management in the Mayor's office that works with all departments, including the Office of Homeless Services, to make sure we're keeping up with KPIs for the entire city. Angie could probably tell you more, as well as anybody at OHS, about the housing dashboard work that's underway. We have even more funding going into making sure that visibility of our progress on overall housing commitments is being met. I think I'm looking next at when we get all of the work in hand on how we can best make the quickest progress on permanent supportive housing. We'll be tracking that. But I would say the overall approach we've taken to performance management with Clifton Pay and Steve Lopez in our office and the HMIS process alongside the housing dashboard work are all very closely related. And I think we also look at things we're required to do under our continuum of care scenario, where we know we engaged in the point-in-time count again this year, and we'll have data on that very soon, I think.
Advocates often feel we fall short, many advocates in this room, not because of lack of effort, but lack of alignment. How can we unify our messaging and efforts across nonprofits, government, the public, to secure more local funding and create lasting solutions? In many ways, this may be the most important question of the day. I guess I will treat this question as a call to action for this room. Again, I hope everybody leaves here resolved to focus on solutions and be forward-looking as much as possible and seek those points of alignment even past points of disagreement. This is a big deal. We have a homelessness planning council. We have a continuum of care. We have spaces and places that we are organized. And let me acknowledge, too, we do fall short. It's very, very hard not to fall short when we know that, let's just start with the raw cost of what it takes to produce a home. If the cost of a single unit of housing ranges from $150,000 to $300,000 to create, depending on the conditions on the ground, then you're talking about billions of dollars. And I mean, our entire operating budget right now is just over $3 billion. And if we put all of that entire single year of what it costs to operate the city into housing, we may get enough just to cover the people that we know about in the point-in-time count. It is very, very expensive to develop housing for everyone, and that is why this can't just be a metro scenario. But I think that, again, let's acknowledge that the reason that we are confronting the challenge of homelessness is because we do not have enough housing for everyone in this city to have secure and stable housing. And that should be a unifying principle, that we can acknowledge that, recognize that Metro alone isn't going to have the funding for it, but that if our overall landscape of people in this room are willing to bring more people into this conversation, if we can build the level of trust. I will tell you from personal experience, one of the best things that I got to participate in was the strategic planning process for what was then still the Metro Homelessness Commission, where great partners through a HUD technical assistance program came and went through an extensive trust-building exercise. And just like the city grows and changes, because there is so much passion, because there is so much vulnerability, because so many people come into this very complicated landscape in different ways. People with lived experience, people with deep policy experience, people with experience in outreach.
people in experience with home construction or services, that there is a lot of complexity here. And we're talking about the people in the most vulnerable conditions, because if you lack housing security, you lack just about any other kind of security in your life. And so that, to me, still remains the place we should be building trust around. If we disagree with an approach, we can vocalize it and advocate for better. And I guess I would say from our standpoint in the mayor's office, continuing to make progress on creating housing, offering services, making sure that we have appropriate housing navigation so people know what their options are, building partnerships, because we know we're going to continue to need a network of everything from shelters to transitional housing to permanent housing. We want to be a part of making huge, huge progress over the next few years. I hope we come out of here unified and resolved to do that.
This town hall included lots of speakers who presented lots of lessons from other cities. And I will say, these questions definitely came from all of you wonderful attendees. And I know you weren't here for a large part of that, but I'm still going to ask this question. Will you commit to implementing evidence-based solutions offered today and monitoring outcomes, or how will you implement those to ensure real progress? Will your office hold us all accountable?
Yeah, I will say it this way. I don't know what the ideas are. We always love evidence-based approaches. We tend to look to subject matter experts, and better than anything else, I will be the first to say, if I see a good idea that someone else is doing in some city anywhere else, I am happy to steal it and put it into play here in Nashville. And I think the hardest part about any of these conversations is the context that matters. In the cities that I have seen, that I have traveled to personally, that I know people on the ground that seem to have better approaches to homelessness mitigation, it is not usually that there is a secret formula that they've unlocked that we just are unwilling to unlock. Very often there is some kind of context in their landscape. There are unique characteristics about Salt Lake City that have made them one of the cities at the forefront of this in the state of Utah. Very often there is a state legislature, there is a funding stream, there is something that has been unlocked as a tool that we don't have access to. And so very often we see those good ideas and have to make adjustments so it can work in Nashville. We hear routinely, for instance, that we'd love to have a dedicated funding stream for housing. We don't have access to that in the same way that we were able to create the dedicated stream for transit. And so the best alternative we've had is to make year over year substantial investments in the Barnes Housing Trust Fund. But we always are looking for opportunities to do more. And so I think we're going to continue to advocate for changes in state policy that give us more flexibility on funding. We've got a couple that have already happened in just the past couple of years that I know that are factored into the Unified Housing Strategy that we're going to try to take action on. But overall, we welcome new ideas, we welcome new partners, and I hope some of the people that got engaged today, maybe for the first time in our conversation in Nashville, stay engaged to help us get even better.
For those who fall outside the formal network of providers, especially grassroots or faith-based groups, there's a concern about feeling left out. How will the city engage with service providers outside of the official continuum of care?
Yeah, I guess my hope is that there's room at the table for everyone. There are capacity challenges. It's hard for me personally. It's hard for, I think, any member of any different department in Metro to, network one-on-one with everybody in this room, for instance, would take the better part of a year. And so we need to be in a position where we can gather in focused groups, but also that people have entry points that work. One of the more successful things that I mentioned earlier has been leadership in our faith-based community. Sometimes just where there has been a great partnership that's developed between a specific church or a specific faith-based institution or organization affiliated with a church that has found a mission-driven development partner. One of the most important things that our housing division at Metro Planning is doing right now is creating a faith-based development institute to make those things that have come out of the gates already more scalable, make those entry points easier. And I think maybe one of the best things we could always have at hand is a ready answer for the question of what can I do to help. And so there are a couple different ways, right? For larger scale philanthropists right now today, I would say the best thing that those people could do with resources in the 7 figures or up would be to join the Catalyst Fund and help us get to completion on that. If somebody that wanted to just be a small scale donor came to the table and said, hey, I'd like to make a $5 recurring donation to something in the city that helps, I mean, I think we've got a network of great partners where I could easily point someone to providers, but there's also a question of what do you want to help with? Do you want to help with urgent needs today? Do you want to help with building momentum? And so I think having some ready answers to where people can plug in is important. I think we're really getting there on the housing creation side and the service provision side. I think there are some other communities that have more mature philanthropic backbone organizations that are able to marshal resources specifically for homelessness, and I think that's one of the things that people in this room may have some capacity to make more progress on more quickly.
Moving on to special populations and supportive services. Youth experiencing homelessness often face unique trauma and barriers that general services don't fully address. How can we ensure that unhoused youth receive specialized care that meets their needs and supports their long-term success?
Yeah, this is important. I think probably everybody in here knows about all of the various things that are in the ecosystem, from HMIS and coordinated entry to VI, SPDAT, and other things. And I think most of you probably know of our youth-focused organizations like the Oasis Center and Launchpad that have already been there. And I think overall, as with most other scenarios, we need to make sure that people who are young people with lived experience also are included in the conversation. I will say I participate in person as often as I can with the Mayor's Youth Council, where I have talked to people on that council who are going through the traditional academic process, but some of whom have struggled directly with housing security issues. And so it's really important to be able to factor their perspectives in from a safety scenario, from a housing scenario. I think overall, though, we're very fortunate to have organizations like Safe Haven, like Launchpad, like Oasis that look at things from the perspective of families and specifically from youth and specifically from an LGBTQ plus perspective with youth to make sure that we're covering all of those things that have made circumstances for why somebody might be in a position where they lack housing security as a young person factored into the solutions that they need. Because ultimately we need to be making all of our progress here something that works for all ages.
For our unhoused individuals with addiction issues, housing just simply isn't enough. After housing, what do you believe is the next most important step to support someone in addiction recovery so they retain the long-term housing?
Yeah, I think this is why continuing to invest in, to find pathways to accelerate permanent supportive housing in particular is so important. But I also think it's why, as we watch a federal policy landscape move away from housing first, that does not mean we as a community are required to move away from that. I think when you give somebody housing as an option, that is ultimately the first form of security they need. It does not, if we can refer you to services that may address a part of a substance abuse or addictive scenario, it does not still put a roof over your head or offer warmth when it's cold, or cooling in an environment that we know we get extreme weather, not just in winter. And so I think, to me, I still approach this from the standpoint of our first priority ought to be able to make sure that we can navigate you to a place where you can make use of those services, and then make sure those services are available. We have a few very strong models of this. We need to continue to produce more. I know that Metro is not the only organization in the city that now offers permanent supportive housing pathways, but we just need to keep those referral pipelines open and make sure that we have strong scenarios for people to access services. Some silver lining out of tough news in the past is that with the rapid spread of problems related to opioids in multiple different markets, we have settlement money available. We have reconstituted our Behavioral Health and Wellness Advisory Committee. We have council members who are very focused on this. We have new leadership at the Metro Public Health Department, which has been a great partner on this. We have some really talented people in our police department. We have our Office of Nightlife, all focused on things that are specifically in the domain of opioid mitigation. We've seen some progress there, but I think ultimately the landscape is we're going to continue to do everything we can on making sure that housing is available, and then we're going to, as often as we can in those scenarios, for people who need services to come alongside those scenarios, we're going to try to continue to make sure we have the people that have the specialized training to offer those services and make the services available.
Policy enforcement and emergency response. A number of questions on this. I tried to put it all in a few. Encampments remain a very visible part of the city's landscape. Residents want clarity on what the city's actual policy is. As current laws concerning encampments are actively changing, our current laws concerning encampments actively enforced. And when action is taken, are individuals arrested, relocated, or connected with services?
Yeah, I guess let's start here, because I think this may be the most complicated scenario in an environment where we know we can't house everybody. At this moment, if you just took a narrow look at state law in Tennessee that applies to Nashville, overnight outdoor camping on public land is illegal. And that means there is nowhere for anyone to legally be overnight if they don't have residential access to a property. So we're forced into an untenable scenario already by virtue of state law. I will say our local police and DA generally are not invested in a process of making that their priority from a public safety standpoint. We are focused on making sure that overall crime rates stay down, and we know that there are people struggling to find and access housing on a daily basis in Nashville. So I guess I would say, I think in this room you could probably find, if we broke up this room into groups of people that said we think you should have sanctioned encampments as an approach versus those that didn't, you would not find that everybody was seated only in one part of the room. It has been one of the longest simmering discussions in the city. We do have an outdoor encampment strategy that the Homelessness Planning Council has worked on. There is a prioritization process. We have also had an emergency weather process. And I think what you're going to continue to see is challenging discussions about scenarios where we know people are gathering and we know there are difficult circumstances emerging there. In the encampments that I'm aware of personally, there have been very troubling scenarios that really do rise to the level of public safety that I think do mean that the encampment as a whole needs a lot of focal attention. I've looked at multiple different cities in terms of how they do this, and the best cases are the ones that I think we need to continue to aspire to, where encampment activity is really, you have a focus that is, again, keeps housing at the forefront, keeps outreach and trust building at the forefront, keeps service availability at the forefront, keeps the kind of resource fairs that I know OHS has had chronically available, but also doesn't tolerate scenarios that allow for human trafficking, that allow for dangerous fire hazards, that allow for where there may be a point at the encampment where it interacts with something that runs through the encampment that creates systemic hazards. And so all of those things have to come together, and this goes back, I think, ultimately to the question around trust. And I think what I've also seen is that there isn't a lot of trust around the process of how we handle encampments, especially if there is a process-based approach to resolving one. And so we've got, I think, still work to do, trust to build, and models to follow there. I think right now, though, this remains one of those long-term gray areas where we just, the recognition on the front end has to be, it is the lack of housing that is leaving the encampments done in the first place, and when we get somebody housed, that's a moment to celebrate. When we can't get somebody housed, we know we still got work to do.
All right, I'll give you a little help on this one, knowing that there are a room full of service providers here. If you, Mayor O'Connell, were unhoused in Nashville today, where would you go? Remember, you have service providers everywhere. And what options would you have? Where would you go? And what options would you have? You are nervous for the first time.
Well, so let me just start here by saying, if somehow I and my family lost access to our house today, we'd still be better off than a lot of people who wind up chronically homeless. And so I think it is important to acknowledge that up front before I answer this question. I grew up in Nashville. If I needed to couch surf for a long time with friends, even with my kids, I knew that we could arrange to do that. My parents are still here. So I think it's important to acknowledge the circumstances of my reality before we get to the hypothetical. But I know Howard Allen is sitting right here. He would be maybe the first person I would go talk to for some advice because of the bracelet that he gave me that I have worn every day since, that recognizes the importance of Charlie Strobel and the things that he has done. I think my next stop would probably be Room in the Inn. I'd probably make sure that I always had a copy of Where to Turn in Nashville available in my pocket, which for those who don't know, if you are in this room and don't know about the guide, it is partner produced by the Contributor and Open Table. And I'd make sure I knew from friends who have been out, including one who told me that's a great place to sleep if you're on the streets. I generally make sure to look for security. I think I see Liz from the library here. I know there are places that take care of people within Metro on a regular basis that may not have being a provider as a part of their core mission, but still do it. But again, I am very lucky because I come to this question with some knowledge. I come to this question with my physical and mental health intact. I come to this question with very, very few of the characteristics that apply to somebody who may have wind up homeless. But I also come to this question from a standpoint of having reached the end of a month's rent with no money in my bank account, my credit card's maxed out, and in the middle of a recession, and wondering if I was going to have to come close to answering the question. And I think it's important to recognize that the line between housing security and insecurity, even for people who would never consider themselves homeless, is still too present for too many Nashvillians in a city that has a poverty rate that stays close to 14%. And so we've still got a lot of work to do on that front so that fewer people have to confront that question.
Building the right kind of housing. Not all housing is created equal, especially for people existing in homelessness. What are your plans to increase the number of affordable housing units across Davidson County that follow the Proving Housing First model?
Yeah, I mean, this is, again, the all-hands scenario of the unified housing strategy. We've got year one investments recommended in the budget that is before the Metro Council right now. We hope to continue those investments for a full decade. That is one step. We know that as a part of the U in UHS, unified is the thing that matters most. So we do hope to be able to accelerate development of permanent supportive housing. We do need our friends and partners at MDHA, our Metropolitan Development Housing Authority, to be in the game there as well. We need to continue to operate effective data for how we get people into housing. I'm very pleased to see that the Barnes Housing Trust Fund Commission has started to approve more projects that focused on 0 to 30% of area median income housing. So we need our mission-driven development community to be very engaged in that. So as we go through the UHS process in year one, as we bring somebody into the mayor's office focused specifically on housing for the foreseeable future, as we try to implement as many of the strategies as we can within UHS, we are going to need everybody in this room. We are going to need leaders in our development community, in our philanthropic community, in our business community to be joining with everyone to make sure that we can do as much as we can to hit the goals that are outlined in UHS. I think for us right now, the strategic plan developed through the Homelessness Planning Council and OHS, the Unified Housing Strategy, the Housing and Infrastructure Study that is in front of Metro Council, and going back to the table with Nashville Next at the 10-year mark are all going to help us be kind of the guide points for how we build as much housing as we can, and within the housing as much affordable housing as we can over the next decade. So we've got a blueprint, and we are taking our first steps, and we hope those steps get bigger and that more people come in and are part of that unified approach as we take each step.
There's also lots of concern about the effectiveness of transitional or temporary housing. As people are moved out of encampments, like this week, into temporary shelter and housing, what is our success rate in helping them remain housed long-term?
As I've looked at the data that have come from, the kind of the ARP, if we had one-time federal funding from the American Rescue Plan Act, if we look at follow through on that data and data from OHS that's coming primarily from HMIS, but HMIS, we have a great dashboard through OHS too on this. We seem to be hovering at about a little over an 80% success rate in keeping people from returning to homelessness when they are have the opportunity to be in transitional housing. And so we seem to be performing above the national average here, but it is something we need to be very attentive to, because so much of the funding that we put into rapid rehousing scenarios was one-time federal funding, and not all of it is going to remain intact. We had a huge breakthrough after a frustrating series of delays just last week, where we were able to use some pallet shelters that were procured during the pandemic that had not been able to be used because of a complicated mix of state and local codes and safety scenarios. We finally are able to get those out. The RFP has gone out. We hope some providers will help with that. But I also think this is one of those things that we always need to be looking at in the same way that we've got the UHS guiding how we prioritize every single dollar spent. Is a dollar available for housing best spent in the Barnes Housing Trust Fund? Is it best put into the Callis Fund? Is it best offered through abatement to low-income housing tax credit scenario? We've got a similar scenario, I think, for housing and services, specifically in the homeless domain. Is a dollar better spent on shelter? Is a dollar better spent on transitional housing? Is a dollar better spent on permanent housing, whether it's permanent, very low-income affordable, or permanent supportive? And so it is constantly a prioritization of the resources available. And so I think that's an ongoing conversation that we expect to be guided by the Continuum of Care, Homelessness Planning Council, OHS staff, and all of the partners here today.
Despite the need, programs like rapid rehousing and voucher systems are under-resourced. What are you doing to expand housing specifically designated for the unhoused, especially for those who can't afford market rent without a voucher?
I think this is where we have to recognize the departure from normal at the federal level and recognize that many communities across the country are going to be in crisis if anything like what has passed Congress actually gets fully and finally approved by the Senate. Because it could decimate vouchers. And I will say, from schools funding, including Head Start, from heating and energy assistance to some of the infrastructure funding, healthcare funding, pick a public policy domain and look at the recurring federal funding that has existed in communities across America for more than a generation, and imagine if it all went away. And that's the work we've had to do this year, really for the first time that I can ever recall in Metro. Certainly the pandemic put a lot of pressure on scenarios that relied on activity-based revenue or even the ability to operate, for instance, transit systems, many of which either partially shut down or had parts of themselves go offline. I think anybody in here knows we went through an extended period where libraries were physically closed for a period during the pandemic. The saving grace there in all of those scenarios, though, was the federal government was a core backstop. Now, the federal government is going further in the other direction than was previously, I think, imaginable, where beyond being a backstop, they're not going to participate. The strong risk is they're not going to participate in systems that we have developed. We have systematically over the past several years improved our performance as a city on both deployment and kind of accountability within vouchers, but also within the Performance Evaluation Committee and awards from HUD specifically to homelessness. If all that funding goes away, you're already looking at a recommended budget that our office has proposed that puts a few $1 million in for vouchers, but we can't possibly at a local level without other massive structural changes. If this is just funding cuts across the board and we are told we must absorb the costs, we're not going to be able to replace all of them. Even, for instance, if you look at where we are on traditional local allocation of dollars for housing, yes, we are achieving a local high water mark in a combination of new investments and accumulated abatements for housing this year, but the very best years we had were the years that we had one-time federal money to put into housing. And so we're replacing quite a bit of that across all of our allocations that go into our approach to the UHS. We are doing a little bit as we approach the Office of Homeless Services, but between our housing division and MDHA right now, one of the biggest crisis points in the federal budget is what do we do if we suddenly have a minuscule supply of funding and vouchers.
Not everyone is excited about affordable housing developments going up in their neighborhoods. How do we overcome neighborhood opposition to new affordable housing project? And what's your message to residents who say, not in my backyard?
I don't know that I have a message for them, because I think the best counter is to have people who are willing to say yes in my backyard show up as often as the people who say no. This is a big deal. Last night wasn't just a public hearing on the budget, it was also a public hearing on zoning bills, many of which look to offer scenarios. There is a council member who almost shot down some already approved Barnes funding that would have potentially jeopardized a bigger package from THDA for a massive amount of affordable housing in multiple council districts. If they are not hearing from people who know how important it is to have affordable housing in anybody's backyard, then we're showing up for the wrong ways. I would love for everybody who showed up and asked for more funding last night to also show up when we have Barnes-funded projects that need rezonings to say, yes, we want these in the communities that developers have located, and there are some neighbors who support them. I showed up, we had new neighbors in my own neighborhood when Inspiritus came to town, and I see Mick sitting at the front table. This was a complicated conversation in my own neighborhood when I was still a member of the Metro Council, because we had some people who were very concerned about it. As we had the community level conversation and showed exactly what was going to be happening on the corner, you still heard the traditional arguments of parking and traffic and safety and so forth, but I think as what looked flat on paper started to come to life through imagination, as they met some of the project team, as they met some of the potential residents, the overall neighborhood got better. But we also had neighbors willing to join me in saying yes in our backyard, and I think Mick could tell you it mattered. In any community where somebody has proposed a project that is good for the community as a whole, both the neighborhood and the broader community, we have to have more people raising their hands and saying yes. And I guess the other thing, maybe I do have a message for people who say not in my backyard. It's not your backyard. Often, this becomes a scenario about somebody wanting to control somebody else's property and limit the availability for the person who doesn't live there yet to have that opportunity. That's not your backyard. That's somebody else's backyard, or somebody who wants to have a backyard near you. So we probably ought to think about even that phrase, but we do need people to say yes who want something in their community.
You'll see that again. Am I gone? Oh, you'll see that again in writing. That's not your backyard. I like it. We're going to end on this, bridging the divide, and I think it's a great place to land. Many feel we live in two Nashvilles, one with opportunity and one with struggle. But there's a strong will to collaborate, even in this room. How can we better connect with stakeholders across sectors? Neighborhoods, addresses, and just unify overall rather than divide.
Yeah, I think this is where something we've been doing a lot of work around that started with Choose How You Move, where we've got not only multiple Metro departments, but multiple Metro adjacent entities, and then multiple community partners, including now an advisory committee on transportation, working together. We're trying to get better at cross-sector collaboration where Metro is involved, usually with key departments and staff, sometimes with funding, sometimes with civic volunteers who agree to join a board or commission or a special committee. And I think we're seeing examples of that with the Unified Housing Strategy. I think the work that comes out of what we're kicking off with the Community Foundation, having a housing coordinator in our office, is going to allow for a lot of that. But I want this to be anchored around the process of that multiple theories of change, that different perspectives still reaching shared goals allowed for collaboration in the first place. Like, my hope would be that there isn't a day where any provider, any advocacy organization, anybody in the ecosystem that wants to solve this problem would say the Office of Homeless Services or the Homelessness Planning Council is a rival. If there are things that need to happen, then we need to find the pathways to do that. I think I and our office are always going to be looking at civic and community engagement. Brittany Irby, who has led that team, has been out there working on a lot of different things. We have been focused on strategy for deeper investment in North Nashville, but she also, just a couple weeks ago, had a really interesting conversation with folks about immigration. And so there are going to be a lot of different voices that need to come together and are going to need to share space in ways that are uncomfortable. But I know Mike Hodge, who spoke at public hearing last night years ago, taught me a super valuable lesson that I think will be present today, which is that any good meeting has tension, and we're going to need the cross-sector collaboration process to go through some of the tension things. But my hope is that the tension ultimately results in building of trust and not erosion of trust, and that we can simultaneously acknowledge both progress and ongoing challenges. And there may be different approaches, and somebody may not always get their way after a decision gets made. But at the end of the day, I think the expectation in Nashville that we are trying to take care of our entire population of residents, regardless of their housing status, regardless of age or ability, that we are working toward a shared goal of making it easier for people to stay is the starting point. And I think from that starting point, we still have a lot of progress we can make together, even in a very challenging landscape. So I arrived today, I will say, pessimistic about things beyond our borders and above my pay grade, but optimistic still about what we can accomplish in Nashville together.
Thank you, Mayor. We are honored to have you. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, everybody.
All right. Aren't you guys hungry? Of course, I am too. We are ready for lunch, and I'm going to give you 3 minutes back. You get to get out there earlier. All right. And then it's 12:30 to 1. And we hope you return for the amazing rest of the sessions. And remember, if I do not know you face to face, I want to see you. Introduce yourself. You've received my emails.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.